There is a stillness that dwells beneath the ocean, a kind of silence deeper than silence itself. It is not silent because nothing is there. It is silent because of all that is there. The sea keeps secrets older than memory itself. Entire cities collapsed without a word. Ships that disappeared in the middle of a sentence. Sounds resonate in darkness without clear origin. Sometimes the ocean whispers softly. Other times it screams aloud. And all this happens in the depths beyond reach. Tonight, we begin to delve into blue silence. Not to disturb, but to listen closely. This is not about myths. They are real mysteries, documented, reported, and, in some cases, witnessed by hundreds of people. Some are captured by radar systems. Others left behind remains. Others simply vanished away. We do not start with a bang, but a pulse. In 1997, in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, the NOAA recorded an ultra-low frequency sound. It was loud indeed, louder than any whale, submarine, or explosion. They called it bloop, simply. What made bloop unique was not its volume. It was organic. The spectrogram's signature seemed almost alive, as if it had been produced by a biological being. But if that were true, what would have produced it would have to be larger than any living being known to science. At first, researchers speculated widely. Some suggested an unknown marine creature. Others murmured about giant squids or prehistoric beasts hidden in the abyssal depths for a long time. The bloop came from somewhere near Point Nemo, an area of the ocean considered the most remote point on Earth. No islands, no ships, no human presence, only water, infinite and crushing water. Later, official reports dismissed the sound as movement of glacial ice undersea. But not everyone felt convinced. The recording did not match any ice earthquake. And what was more disturbing, it happened once. No other similar noise has since been detected. It arrived, was heard, and then disappeared. The bloop remains one of the loudest, most inexplicable sounds ever captured by ocean surveillance. And even now, it remains in scientific databases, labeled with a quiet uncertainty, unknown biological origin. But that is just a start. Thousands of kilometers from Point Nemo is the Devil's Sea, a region off the coast of Japan known for strange disappearances and navigational anomalies. Often called the Bermuda Triangle of the Pacific, the Devil's Sea has long been avoided by fishermen and sailors alike. Entire fleets disappeared there without any trace. In 1952, the Japanese government launched an investigation after the disappearance of 5 military vessels in the region. The ships sent to investigate, the KO, Maru No. 5, also disappeared, along with its 31 crew members. There were no calls, no wreckage, nothing found. Some blame magnetic anomalies there. Others suggest underwater volcanic activity or giant waves. But none of these explanations fully clarify the magnitude and the silence of the disappearances. Ancient legends speak of sea dragons, of islands that appear and disappear, and of whirlpools that suck entire ships into the abyss. But those stories existed well before GPS, radar, or sonar. And still, with all our technology, we keep losing ships there. Even nowadays, sometimes it is not only what we see, but what we don't. One of the most chilling oceanic mysteries of today has to do with a sound, a pattern, actually a mechanical click in the depths of the Arctic Ocean. In the 1980s, divers began to report it, describing it as rhythmic, deliberate, not geological or biological, but something else. Some people called it the quacker. The sounds seemed to follow submarines, often dodging sonar, appearing and disappearing at impossible speeds. The captains of the Soviet Navy believed it was a new form of NATO surveillance. NATO believed it was Soviet technology. Neither was right. To this day, the quacker's origin is still unknown. It was heard for decades, but then, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it stopped being heard. Did something change in the ocean? Or did it simply stop revealing itself? The surprising thing about these accounts is not only the mystery, but the silence that follows. There is no follow-up, no answers, just absence. But perhaps that is how the ocean acts. It reveals itself slowly in fragments. And only when we listen enough to hear what it has been talking about all the time, when your mind feels heavy again. Remember this place. Subscribe to return to calm once more. Second part. The ship that returns silently. The night falls differently at sea. It is not like on land, where the sky slowly darkens behind trees or buildings. At sea, the night seems like a curtain looming over the world. In one moment, you are surrounded by infinite water bathed in golden light, and the next, there is nothing. There are no borders, no points of reference, just black waves and a darker sky. And in that void, strange things happen, things that do not always have explanations. In 1955, a ship called MV Joyous set sail from Pier Samoa bound for the Tokelau Islands. It was a routine trip. The vessel had made similar trips dozens of times, transporting cargo and passengers across the remote reaches of the South Pacific. It was not a luxury ocean liner, just a robust ship its captain and crew trusted. The weather was calm. The cargo was safe. There were 25 people on board, 9 crew members and 16 passengers, among them a doctor who had to perform surgery at the destination. They never arrived. After the Joya failed to arrive on schedule, a search was initiated that lasted weeks. Planes tracked thousands of kilometers. Ships combed the waters. Nothing. No remains of the shipwreck. No oil slicks. No distress signals. Then, 5 weeks later, the Joya was spotted more than 600 meters off its route, adrift. It was very inclined to one side, partially submerged, but still afloat. The hull had not suffered any breaches. Its cargo was scattered but not looted. The lifeboats were missing, and all the people on board had disappeared. Inside, the scene was strange. There was half-eaten food untouched. The medical supplies were open, and there were bloody bandages near the deck. The navigation log had disappeared. The radio was tuned to an international distress frequency, but the antenna was broken, rendering the radio useless. The cabin clock had stopped at exactly 10:25. It was as if time had stopped in the middle of a sentence. There were no signs of violence or panic, but something occurred. Something important enough for 25 people to abandon a seaworthy ship, leaving behind food, water, fuel, and shelter. Over the years, various theories have appeared and disappeared. One suggests that there was a sudden leak in the engine room, leading the crew to believe that the ship was sinking, but the Joya was built with balsa wood and designed to be unsinkable. Even in its damaged state, it remained afloat for weeks, so it was illogical that it would sink. Another theory blames pirates, but valuables remained untouched. The watches, the money, the cargo, everything remained there. Nothing was stolen and no blood was found, except on some bandages. Some proposed mutiny or a medical emergency that caused panic. Others suggest something less explainable, like a giant wave, a sudden hallucination from contaminated food, or an encounter with something non-human. What chilled the investigators most was the silence. There were no signs, no final messages, just a ship floating like a ghost through the Pacific. Without moorings, empty and silent. The ocean is full of ghost ships, but few as disturbing as the Joya, a ship that lost not only its passengers. It lost its history. The cause was never determined. No corpses were found. No rafts were recovered. No one appeared. The sea swallowed everything, leaving only questions and the disturbing image of a ship adrift, with its eyes open and its mouth closed forever. Stories like that of the Joya remind us that the ocean does not always take things with a bang. Sometimes it takes without violence, without signs, without memory. Further south, near the cold waters of Antarctica, another silence pulses under the ice. In the 1960s, seismographic stations recorded something strange beneath the frozen sea. A rhythmic, low-frequency signal, unlike any known tectonic movement. It was called the bloop, and its origin remains uncertain. It was not an earthquake, nor machinery, but a deep and throbbing presence. Something that moved, changed, was alive. The frequency seemed to come from under the seabed, under layers of ice and crust, too deep for whales, too deep for submarines. And yet, it came and went like a breath, as if something huge was sleeping under the edge of the continent, and the sensors captured its movements. Attempts to locate it failed. When the researchers returned with more advanced instruments, the sound disappeared. But in some reports, discreetly archived and rarely cited, there are notes that mention a mechanical regularity, patterns, deliberate changes, and then a sudden stop, as if whatever was had realized they were listening. In 1977, thousands of kilometers away, a radio telescope at Ohio State University detected a narrowband radio signal from the constellation Sagittarius. It lasted 72 seconds. The astronomer who monitored it at the time circled the printout and wrote a word next to it. Wow! To date, the WOW signal is the most credible potential message from beyond Earth ever recorded. Its frequency matched the hydrogen line, a universal constant among scientists, and the most likely frequency to be used by intelligent life attempting interstellar communication. But here's where things get twisted. In 2017, an article suggested the signal came from a passing comet. The theory was widely debated, but even if true, it would not explain why a similar signal had never been detected before or since. It arrived once, was heard, and then disappeared. Like the bloop, the more we delve into the mysteries of the ocean, the more the mysteries of the stars begin to resonate. We'll look up and wonder. We'll look down and vanish. And maybe they're connected. Maybe we have been looking in the wrong direction all along. Maybe the things we seek in the sky, signs, ships, observers, have been waiting in the depths all this time. Because the ocean not only reflects the night sky, but also hides it. Part 3. Lights under the surface. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where the horizon extends to infinity and the waves break like an ancestral memory, there have been nights when sailors saw lights that should not exist. Not above, but below them. Pale, luminous glows that rise from under the water, pulsing gently like the breath of something alive. They are not tricks of moonlight. They move, respond, and have remained unexplained for centuries. One of the first documented sightings dates to the 19th century. It was recorded by sailors aboard the British ship HMS Vulture. The crew described finding a vast circle of light under the surface, shining with a greenish-white color and extending almost 1.5 kilometers in diameter. As they approached, the light dimmed and then lit up again as if reacting to their presence. There were no lanterns, no phosphorescent algae, no known marine life capable of producing illumination of such magnitude. Only silence and that constant, intelligent glow. It was not an isolated case. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, similar reports emerged from all oceans. Strange underwater lights that moved independently, sometimes chasing ships, sometimes floating slowly beside them for hours. Submariners, in particular, have long reported encounters with inexplicable underwater luminescence. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet submarines recorded hundreds of cases of what they called USOs, or unidentified submerged objects. Unlike their aerial counterparts, these entities traveled underwater at speeds that defied hydrodynamics, made no noise, and often glowed from within. In 1963, during NATO naval maneuvers off the coast of Puerto Rico, an American submarine, the USS Wasp, was followed by a fast, bright underwater object. Radar and sonar operators confirmed the presence of the anomaly, which they followed as it moved at speeds exceeding 150 knots, much faster than any submarine of the time could reach or even survive. As they approached, the object submerged at impossible angles and then disappeared completely. The exercise was stopped and no official explanation given. Those who were there say it wasn't a technical failure. They saw it, chased it, and it beat them. Near the coast of Norway, in the deep waters of the Norwegian Sea, similar phenomena have occurred. In fact, they're so frequent that the locals have given them a name, the Hessdalen Lights. Although often visible in the sky, witnesses have reported versions of the same lights emerging from nearby lakes and rivers, moving in formation before disappearing into the ground or sea. In one case, a light shot out of the water without splashing, stayed in the air, and then entered the mountains at a speed that radar could not record. Researchers installed sensors and cameras. The phenomenon continued, intermittently, intelligently, and defying any natural explanation. More recently, deepwater oil rig operators in the Gulf of Mexico have reported strange readings. Cameras sent to inspect the seabed occasionally capture unexplained flashes of light, sometimes accompanied by sudden magnetic interference. In one case, a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, lost all signal for 90 seconds after encountering what was described as a rotating luminous structure resting on the ocean floor. When contact was re-established, the object had disappeared. The images, partially damaged, show little more than blurred outlines and a flash of movement before the image goes blank. Officially, it was attributed to power fluctuations, but the operators knew their machines and didn't believe it. Some researchers have begun to speculate that these lights and objects may not just be visitors to Earth, but may live here. The ocean covers more than 70% of the planet. However, we have explored less than 5% of its depths. The trenches and underwater cave systems remain largely unexplored. If there was a place for something or someone to hide, this would be ideal. And then there is the Baltic Sea anomaly, discovered in 2011 by a group of Swedish treasure hunters scanning the seabed with sonar. The object appears to be a huge, disc-shaped formation nearly 200 feet in diameter, resting silently in the darkness of the Baltic Sea. The structure is too symmetrical to be natural, with right angles, sharp edges, and what appears to be a staircase going up one side. The sonar images are unsettling. It looks artificial, abandoned, watching us. The first dives revealed a layer of what looked like burned rock around the anomaly, as if it had experienced extreme heat before settling on the seabed. The electrical equipment that neared it often failed. The cameras shut off. The communications failed. When the divers tried to take samples, their instruments acted erratically. The geological analyses revealed that some parts of the anomaly did not match the surrounding seabed. Some of the materials seemed out of place, even manufactured. Some speculated that it could be an old Nazi structure, others a sunken temple. But others observed the shape, the angles, the size, and said, "This is not from here." To this day, the anomaly remains intact. The funding to continue exploring ran out. The region was discreetly closed for conservation reasons, and the world moved on. But the lights did not go out. In 2022, an underwater drone launched off the coast of Japan recorded a light slowly spiraling far below the reach of sunlight. It was dismissed as a reflection of the camera, although the images show the light spinning, stopping, and then accelerating upwards before disappearing. Independent analysts found no digital artifact. The images were real, but no one followed up on them. The ocean clings to its mysteries like a child keeping secrets. It does not reveal them. It blinks. It suggests. It lets you see just enough to keep looking, but nothing more. These lights, whether mechanical, biological, or something completely different, appear, move, and disappear with intention. They do not rise from the water like searchlights. They do not act like fish, plankton, or algae. They flash in pulses. They fly under the surface. They wait. And maybe, just maybe, they are not intended for us. Maybe the ocean is not just home to unknown creatures. Maybe it is home to unknown minds. Fourth part, the forgotten shipwreck and the man who was not there. The sea remembers everything. It may not return it to us when we ask, but it keeps it somewhere under the pressure, the currents, and the cold. The ships that sink do not disappear. They rest. Sometimes they are found, sometimes not, and sometimes they return changed. In 1948, a chilling incident occurred in the narrow and busy sea routes of the Strait of Malacca. Several ships reported receiving a distress call from a Dutch freighter known as the SS Orang Medan. The voice on the other side was strange, calm, but broken by static. The message was terrifying in its simplicity. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in the navigation room, and on the bridge, possibly the entire crew has died. There was a pause. Then came the last sentence. ED. And then silence. Nearby ships rushed to locate the ship, triangulating the signal as best they could. Finally, An American merchant ship claimed it had located the Orang Mud adrift. It seemed intact, but was disturbingly still. When the rescue teams went aboard, their discovery turned the mission into a nightmare. The entire crew was dead. Their bodies lay scattered across the deck, bridge, and engine room. Some were frozen in postures of pure terror, their faces contorted in expressions of panic, and their arms raised as if trying to defend themselves from something invisible. Others were found with eyes wide open, mouths agape, and no signs of trauma. Not a single wound, no blood, no gunshots, no traces of violence or fighting. The ship's dog was also found dead, with its teeth bared and back-arched, as if fighting something that wasn't there. There were no survivors. Even stranger was that the corpses showed signs of advanced rigor mortis, suggesting that they had died hours, or perhaps even days, before the distress signal was sent. The radio was intact, but there was no trace of the operator, and the ship, although silent, showed no damage. The boarding team decided to tow the ship to port for investigation, but before they could, smoke began to pour from the lower decks. Moments later, the Orang Mud exploded with such violence that it rose above the water before disappearing beneath the waves. The boarding team narrowly escaped. The wreckage was never recovered, and just like that, the evidence vanished. All kinds of theories arose. Some said that it was a chemical spill and that the ship was carrying illegal cargo, such as potassium cyanide or nerve agents. But that did not explain the utter terror on the faces of the crew. Nor did it explain the absence of burns, chemical residues on the boarding team, or why the radio had transmitted a message after everyone on board was already dead. Others speculated that the ship had been involved in some kind of secret government operation, possibly transporting experimental weaponry or exotic biological material. But no nation has ever confirmed the registration of the Orang Mud. It is not listed in Dutch maritime records. No official maritime document confirms its voyage. It is as if the ship existed solely to disappear. And then there are the most strange theories. Some believe that the Orang Mud encountered something under the sea, something ancient and unknown. The idea of a fear frequency has been raised. The possibility that certain sounds from the seabed, whether natural or synthetic, can trigger uncontrollable fear, hallucinations, and even death. The ocean is known to carry ultra-low frequencies called infrasound, capable of vibrating the human body in a disorienting way. Some researchers believe that these vibrations, amplified in a closed metal hull, could cause paranoia, panic, and even heart failure. But that still leaves this question: what triggered it? Some claim there was a presence aboard. Not a physical presence, but something the crew felt had killed them. Something invisible, something so overwhelming that their bodies responded as if it were a direct threat. Some say they were not killed, but died terrified. And yet, the most chilling part of this story emerged years later. In 1959, a classified report appeared in the archives of a maritime intelligence office in Trieste. It referred to a man found adrift in a lifeboat off the coast of the Philippines, malnourished, dehydrated, and unconscious. When questioned, he gave only one name: Orang. He refused to say anything else. No one could determine his origin. He was not carrying any identification, only a number tattooed on the inside of his forearm. M4, 837. That man disappeared from custody within 2 weeks. There is no record of his transfer. No name, no documentary trace, just a final note scribbled in the file's margin. Do not interrogate again. Appears sensitive to pressure changes. Avoid exposure to sea level pressure for extended periods. The page ends here. It is possible that Orang Mud never existed in any official record, but the story is still told by sailors, whispered in the dining rooms of old cargo ships, and sometimes murmured by those who have heard things at sea that they cannot explain. Because sometimes the ocean hides more than shipwrecks. It hides moments, fragments of terrifying and impossible to prove time that surface only when conditions are right. Just enough time for being seen. Just enough time to never be forgotten. And then they vanish, like a voice on the radio, like a flare in the distance, like a ship that should never have been there. Fifth part: the last signal from the Mariana Trench. There's a place in the Pacific Ocean so deep and inaccessible that sunlight has not touched its bottom in millions of years. The pressure at its base is more than 1,000 times greater than its sea level, enough to crush a human body instantly. It is colder than ice, darker than midnight, and emptier than space. This is the Mariana Trench, specifically its deepest known point, the Challenger Deep, almost 11 kilometers deep. Fewer people have visited this place than have walked on the moon. But in 2016, something or someone sent a signal from that impossible depth. The story begins with a private underwater exploration company based in Australia. Using a remotely operated submersible equipped with state-of-the-art sensors, they were contracted to study the trench as part of a joint research initiative with several Pacific countries. Most of the work was routine, mapping sediment layers, collecting microbial samples, and testing pressure-resistant materials. But on the third day of descent, as the submersible hovered just above the bottom of the trench, it picked up a burst of encoded acoustic noise. The sound did not resemble that of any marine creature or seismic tremor. It was sharp, rhythmic, and structured. The onboard artificial intelligence system detected it immediately. The signal had repetitive elements, a constant increase and decrease in pitch, and intervals that suggested an intelligent origin. At first, the team thought it was a glitch, perhaps electronic feedback or an echo from the submersible itself. But when they analyzed the waveform, it became clear the sound was external. It came from the bottom of the trench, more specifically from inside a narrow crack that had not yet been mapped. The team began recording. The signal repeated every 47 seconds. It lasted almost 4 hours. Then as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. They reviewed the data. The pattern was precise, not random, nor chaotic. The frequencies fell just outside the vocal range of any known whale or fish. Sonar images of the region of origin revealed no obvious structures, no gas vents or geological anomalies, just darkness. The recordings were sent to several universities for verification. A physicist at the University of Tokyo noted that the structure of the signal bore an uncanny resemblance to early human encryption systems, primitive, repetitive, but deliberate. Another researcher at MIT compared the sound to the WOW signal detected by radio astronomers in 1977. Both signals shared a narrow bandwidth peak, although this one was underwater. But perhaps the most chilling observation came from a linguist specializing in nonverbal communication. After analyzing the spectrogram, he wrote a single line in his report. It is not a message. It is a response to what was not said. The company was silent thereafter. Their next expedition, scheduled just 2 months later, was quietly canceled. Funding dried up. The principal investigator retired early. When asked in an interview if the signal could have been faked, he replied, "If it was, we didn't fake it, and if someone else did, it's already down there." The story could have ended there. Just another oddity buried in oceanographic archives, but the data leaked. Amateur researchers, fans, and cryptographers worldwide began analyzing the frequency pattern. The forums were filled with speculation. Ancient civilizations under the sea, alien surveillance, even probes traveling in time. Most dismissed it as fantasy until the second signal arrived. It arrived 2 years later, in 2018, recorded off the coast of Guam by a U.S. Navy hydrophone station. This time, the burst lasted only 11 minutes. But the pattern was unmistakably similar. The same frequency range, the same intervals, only this time it ended with a new sound, a downward sweep in tone, like a sigh or closing door. No other transmissions have been recorded since. Some believe these signals are natural phenomena we have simply not yet classified. Perhaps pressure changes cause deep resonance chambers to emit structured noise. Others point to the presence of manganese nodules and rare earth metals at those depths, suggesting a possibility of natural piezoelectric effects. But those explanations ignore the structure, the pauses, the repetition, the silence between each burst that seems intentional. Those who have listened to the recordings say the sounds are strangely human, not in the voice or tone, but in their weight, as if whoever produced them knew they were being heard. A theory that is often whispered in classified circles is that something was buried in the pit a long time ago, something sealed, crashed, or buried. That the pit itself is not just a geological scar, but a vault, and that the signal was not sent to us, but to open something. For years, there have been stories of strange lights, metallic objects, and even submarines moving at high speed in the area. Most were dismissed as misidentified submarines or oceanic drones. But when the pieces are put together, the signal, the sonar echoes, the disappearances of unmanned drones near the same crack, something begins to emerge. A pattern, a rhythm, a presence. In one of the last internal memos of the exploration company before closing, an anonymous technician wrote a single sentence in the margin of a sonar diagnostic chart. Now, it hears us. Since then, ships in the area have reported unusual compass behavior. Submarine cables have been disconnected, and every few months, a burst of infrasound travels across the Pacific bottom, strong enough to be picked up by sensors, but never repeats. Always different, always distant. But if it is slowed down, if lengthened to the audible range, it sounds like movement. Slow, heavy, deliberate. There's something down there, and it could be waking up. Part 6. The island that disappeared without trace. There are islands on maps that no longer exist, and there are islands that exist but have no name, flag, or history. But then there is a third type, those that disappear not due to erosion or rising sea levels, but for reasons no one can explain. Not even the ocean seems to remember them. One of the most disturbing is the story of Bermuda Island. Located in the Gulf of Mexico, northwest of the Yucatan Peninsula, it appeared on maps as early as the 16th century, catalogued by Spanish cartographers and mentioned in maritime records for centuries. Located at a strategic point in what would become one of the richest oil regions in the hemisphere, Bermuda was not only real. It was mentioned by sailors, settlers, and official Spanish maritime legislation. And then, without warning, it disappeared. By the mid-20th century, efforts to find Bermuda had failed. Satellite scanners showed nothing. Naval expeditions found only open sea. Sonar images found no shallow ridge, submerged landmass, or remains of coral or rock. It was as if the island had never existed. In 2009, the Mexican government, motivated by international pressure on offshore drilling rights, launched an official search operation to verify the existence of Bermuda once and for all. They sent ships and submersibles. They even used foreign intelligence satellites to verify the historical coordinates. There was nothing, not even the relief of the seabed, that suggested that there had ever been land there. So, why had it been on maps for almost 400 years? Some proposed the island had simply eroded and disappeared into the sea. But islands do not vanish without a trace. Even corals leave bony remains or depth anomalies. Others suggested it was a cartographic error repeated for generations. But that does not explain eyewitness testimonies from the 18th century or records of British and Spanish ships that documented their passage through Bermuda, using it as a point of reference for navigation. The theory that began to spread discreetly and cautiously was more chilling. Some believe Bermuda had been deliberately destroyed. It was rumored that the island had been chosen as a target due to its location on a huge underwater oil reserve. If Bermuda no longer existed, the maritime borders would shift, allowing certain countries to claim drilling rights that otherwise would have belonged to Mexico. The island's presence had been a legal anchor to define the territorial waters. Its absence conveniently redrew the borders. But how do you erase an island? A declassified U.S. naval document from the 1970s revealed tests with high-performance underwater explosives capable of leveling seamounts. The records mentioned land deformation tests carried out in the Gulf, although the coordinates were suppressed. Could Bermuda have been intentionally demolished? Could it have been eliminated by a government or several to take control of the black gold that lies under the waves? And if so, what else was eliminated with it? One of the leaders of the 2009 expedition later gave a private interview on condition of anonymity. He admitted that his sonar had detected a strange void a trench of irregular depth with sharp edges, as if something had collapsed inward or had been unnaturally excavated. The anomaly extended hundreds of meters below the surface, and, according to him, its contour did not resemble any geological activity. It seemed symmetrical, built, yet no one mentioned it in the final conclusions. The official statement concluded, "There is no island. There is no geological evidence that an island existed at those coordinates." But this was not the first time that the ocean had lost something important. Throughout the Pacific, there are dozens of accounts of early naval expeditions of sailors encountering islands that appear at night, glowing faintly, and then disappearing in the morning. Some describe hearing voices before landing, only to find empty beaches and ancient ruins with no signs of life. These islands are never found again, neither by radar, nor by satellite, nor even by returning to the exact coordinates. Sailors have a term for them: ghost islands, changing land formations that emerge only when certain tides occur or when the moonlight touches the water at the right angle. Some believe they are atmospheric illusions. Others believe they are real and hidden. One of the oldest stories comes from a Polynesian navigator whose oral tradition speaks of an island called Kalakia, which means the pale edge. It was said that it only appeared once in a lifetime, always in times of political turmoil or before great storms. Those who landed there brought with them strange materials, metallic sand, shells that did not correspond to any known marine species, and stones that shone in the moonlight. All of this has since been lost. In the Atlantic, the story of Antilia resembles that of Bermuda, a phantom island that appeared on maps during the Age of Discoveries, always out of reach of European ships. Some swore they had seen it, an island with tall towers shrouded in mist, but real. Portuguese sailors even tried to claim it. Eventually, it was removed from the maps. Its existence, like Bermuda's, was silently erased. But why do so many cultures separated by oceans and centuries have stories of places that disappear? A disturbing, but impossible to ignore, answer is that these islands exist, only not here. The ocean, with its immense pressure and electromagnetic anomalies, can function as a mirror or a threshold. There are very marginal, but disturbingly persistent, theories that suggest certain places on Earth act as weak points in the fabric of reality. Places where the veil between dimensions or timelines is thinner, where things can pass through. An island could exist in one version of reality, mapped and explored, and then disappear from view in another. And perhaps from time to time, something slips in the opposite direction. When Bermuda disappeared, there were no tremors, no seismic events, no reports of high tides or tsunamis. It simply ceased existing. And what is more, neither the birds, nor the marine migration patterns, nor the fishermen's routes, nothing in the ecosystem seemed to remember it had been there. It's as if the sea itself had been rewritten completely. And that is the scariest thing of all. Because if the ocean can forget an island, if it can silently drag a place into silence without a ripple or scream, what else can it take? Edel. What else has it already taken without a trace now? Edel. Not only ships, but time, memories, entire stories now. Today you could sail through those same coordinates. GPS locked, and you would find nothing more than wind and water. But a long time ago, there was a place ashore in name. Now only the current remembers, and it does not speak. Part 7. The Black Fish from the Baltic Sea. There are stories of coastal towns that never reach newspapers. Tales told at worn tables in bar corners or whispered between old sailors on foggy mornings. Their words are barely heard above the sound of waves crashing against the dock. You will not find these stories in textbooks, but they remain like sea fog in lungs, like salt in blood. One of them is about the black fish of the northern Baltic Sea, near the Gulf of Bonn. Fishing communities have passed down this legend from generation to generation. The story begins in the 1930s, during a series of harsh winters in which fishing boats disappeared without warning. No remains were ever found. No corpses appeared, only ships that never made it home. Locals began to whisper that figures were spotted in the distance. Small black boats low to the water, without lights or flags. These boats made no noise, even in icy waters. The fishermen who crossed paths with them related the same strange details. No one on board ever spoke. No engine was heard, and the boats seemed to glide instead of float, crossing ice fields without trace. At first, people believed they were smugglers, Finns, Russians, or even Germans. But nothing about those boats made much sense. They only appeared at night, always in complete darkness, and when someone tried to approach, they vanished. They did not sail away, nor did they hide behind the fog. They simply vanished. One man, a veteran fisherman named Errol Layton, reported in 1942 that his boat was followed by one of the black ships for almost 6 hours. No matter how fast he sailed, no matter how sharply he turned, the ship remained behind him, just beyond reach of the light from his lanterns. He said that it made no noise, produced no wake, and that every time he looked away, it seemed closer. He did not go out again after that day. The stories intensified during the Cold War, with so much military activity and so many naval secrets circulating in the Baltic. The strange events were attributed to espionage, but in private, commanders and radar operators shared accounts that simply made no sense. Silent signals captured at 3 a.m. m.m. near the seafloor. Shapes that moved like submarines, but did not appear on sonar screens. Interference in communications every time these ships appeared, almost as if the water itself dampened all signals. In 1978, a Swedish coastal radar station recorded an unidentified submerged object traveling at 130 knots near the Åland Islands. The report, later declassified, described it as a matte black object, approximately cylindrical and with no visible propulsion. It entered Swedish territorial waters and then disappeared, heading directly to an area of shallow reefs where no submarine could physically reach. Divers were sent, but nothing was found, not even disturbed sediments. The phenomenon became so common in the region that fishermen gave it a name: the black rowers. A disturbing expression, since the boats had no oars. They didn't need them, but the name stuck. Then in 1994, something changed. That year, the MS Estonia, a passenger ferry traveling between Tallinn and Stockholm, suddenly sank in one of the worst maritime disasters in European history. 852 people died. Officially, the cause was a failure in the ship's bow visor, which allowed water to flood the car deck and capsize the vessel in less than an hour. But the survivors, those who escaped in the lifeboats and clung to the wreckage, told another story. Some spoke of an impact, a strong jolt before the flooding began. Others described seeing something in the water, a dark shape, not another boat, that moved alongside them in the minutes before the tilt. One woman claimed to have seen a low black boat through the window just before the power went out. She said it had no lights or markings, but moved with strange smoothness. These statements were collected, but largely ignored. The official investigation did not mention the presence of other vessels in the area. However, months later, the Swedish Army abruptly declared the wreck site a protected area, not only to prevent looting, but to legally prohibit any future diving and exploration of the sunken ferry. It became one of the most strictly guarded, prohibited maritime areas in the world. The official reason was respect for the dead, but the rumors persisted. A former naval diver, now retired, later claimed in a private interview that he had been sent to examine the area around the wreckage in the days following the disaster. His team found no remains of any other ship, but did find long, narrow marks in the sediment, traces that began at the bottom of the ocean and went up the hull of the Estonia, as if something had contacted it and then moved away. When asked what could have made those marks, he simply replied, "Not us." Other divers began reporting electromagnetic interference at certain coordinates in the Baltic Sea. The interference was so strong that it drained batteries, interfered with compasses, and disabled camera equipment. Many of them turned around. Others did not report their findings. It was easier not to. And then, in 2010, a sonar scanner detected what became known as the Baltic Sea anomaly, a strange disc-shaped formation resting on the seabed. Its structure was too symmetrical to be natural. It seemed artificial, man-made, or even non-man-made. Some compared it to a sunken ship, others to an ancient megalith. But there are no ruins nearby, no civilization to explain it. The anomaly is located less than 100 miles from the last recorded position of the Estonia. It may be a coincidence, but some believe that the black ships come from there, that they are guardians or collectors, that they only appear at night because they must not be seen, that what sank the Estonia was not bad weather or negligence, but the encounter with something older, deeper, and more territorial. Today, few speak openly about black ships. But if you ask enough, especially in the quieter ports, you'll find someone whose grandfather knew someone who saw them, who talks about being followed, about lights failing on deck, about hearing something move in the water just outside the field of vision. The ocean is not empty, not at night. And if you ever find yourself in the Baltic Sea, somewhere between the past and the ice, and you see a dark ship following you with no flag, no crew, making no noise, don't signal, don't turn on lights, and whatever you do, don't stop. Eighth part, the lighthouse that called to the sea. There's a type of loneliness that exists only at sea. It's not just being away from people. It is to be small. Small under the sky, small under the water. Now imagine being alone at sea, but surrounded by a silence that is not your own. A silence that makes you feel watched. That is the silence that the guardians of the Flannan Lighthouse must have felt before disappearing. The Flannan Isles are located off the west coast of Scotland, a group of rugged rocks that rise from the Atlantic like broken teeth. Wind-whipped, remote, and relentlessly battered by the sea. In 1900, the Flannan Isles housed a single structure, a newly built lighthouse staffed by 3 lighthouse keepers who took turns. It was not a place for the faint of heart. The wind howled day and night, the storms were constant, and the closest human contact was more than 20 miles away by boat. The lighthouse had been designed to be self-sufficient, with food stores and dormitories built into the tower. The lighthouse keepers took turns in shifts, 2 on duty and 1 on leave at all times to prevent fatigue and madness from taking hold. In December 1900, the 3 men stationed there were Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur. They were all experienced sailors. They all knew how to survive at sea, and yet they were never seen again. On December 26th, the relief ship Hesperus arrived at the island to relieve the crew. From the moment the ship approached the rocky shore, something felt wrong. The lighthouse was off. No flag was flying on the mast. There was no one on the dock. A feeling of unease took hold of the crew. The captain sounded the ship's siren. Nothing. He fired a flare. There was still no answer. A landing party headed to shore and climbed the slippery stairs leading up to the lighthouse. Inside, everything was tidy, too tidy. The kitchen table was set for a meal. The dishes were carefully placed, but untouched. A chair was overturned, as if someone had suddenly gotten up. Coats and boots were missing, but only 2 sets. The fire had gone out, suggesting that the room had been cold for days. The logbook was still there. The entries were strange. On December 12th, Marshall wrote about strong winds like he had never seen, although weather record from the mainland showed clear skies. He noted that Duckett had been unusually quiet and that MacArthur had been crying, something completely out of place for a seasoned veteran. The next day, he wrote that the storm continued, although no ships off the surrounding coast had reported rough seas. The last entry, dated December 15th, had only 5 words. The storm has passed. God is with us. After that, a search team combed the island. The West Pier was badly damaged. The iron railings were twisted like wires. A box of supplies had been torn from its moorings, and the turf had been torn from the cliffs, as if scratched. But there was no trace of the men. No blood. No torn clothes. No corpses. Just 3 lives lost. The official investigation concluded that a giant wave over 30 meters high had swept the men into the sea as they tried to secure equipment. It was the only explanation that fit the physical damage, but it did not explain why all 3 had abandoned the lighthouse. Protocol dictated that 1 man should always remain inside. Nor did it explain the last entry in the logbook or why there were no storm reports on nearby islands, just 20 miles away. And then came the second mystery. In 1920, 2 decades after the incident, A merchant ship passing the Flannan Isles reported seeing strange lights high on the cliffs. It was not the usual beam of a lighthouse, but a light that flickered slowly and moved in a circle before disappearing. At that time, there was no lighthouse keeper assigned to the lighthouse. The building had long been automated. The captain of the ship described the lights as a cold blue, different from any modern flame or light bulb, and pointed out that, when the ship passed, its compass spun violently for almost 3 minutes. That wasn't the only account. In 1971, a group of amateur radio operators trying to contact distant stations claimed they received a weak transmission while sailing through the area. The voice was male, calm, and monotonous. Repeating the same words over and over in a rhythmic pattern, they recorded it. When played back on land, sound engineers noticed something strange. The voice was superimposed with a second frequency too high to hear with the human ear. When isolated, the second layer translated to GPS coordinates pointing directly to the Flannan. No source has ever been found. The signal never repeated itself. Paranormal researchers believe the lighthouse could be on a natural magnetic anomaly, one of several weak points scattered throughout the Atlantic. Places where electronic devices behave strangely, time seems to alter, and even perception distorts. Some believe these areas serve as natural gates, not necessarily to other dimensions, but to pockets of space where reality dilutes. And then there's the marine version of that theory. Locals speak about the so-called fog, a phenomenon that is partly superstition and partly living reality. It's said that, under exceptional conditions, a pale fog spreads from the sea, silent, dense, and cold. And when it does, it whispers, not like the wind or the waves, but like a voice, low and tempting, just below the threshold of understanding. Fishermen say it sounds like someone familiar, a lost wife, a dead brother, a child's voice. They say if you listen too long, you'll end up following it. The Flannan Isles are believed to be one origin of the calling fog, a place where something ancient and deep calls, not with force, but familiarity. Some believe that the 3 lighthouse keepers heard it, that the storm was not the weather, but the pressure, and that one man abandoned the tower, attracted by the fog. The second followed to rescue him. The third, breaking protocol, ran after them. By then, it was too late, and the sea took those who responded. What remains is a lighthouse still standing, now automated. Its lights sweep the darkness without any witnesses. But, from time to time, even today, ships report strange interference when passing by. Lights flicker, engines fail, shadows are seen on the cliff, and static on the radio has a voice buried inside. There is something chilling about a place designed to be a warning, a beacon against danger, that becomes its source. There is something cruel about the idea that those destined to guide others to safety were themselves guided into the water, into silence, into a part of the sea that doesn't reflect light, but remembers names. Part 9. The Hollow Beneath the Ice. In the vast, frozen expanse of Antarctica, the wind never stops completely. It hisses through the ice in waves carrying centuries of secrets buried under layers of snow and silence. Here, there are no cities, no forests, no sound of life, except for the occasional distant creak of glacial movement. And yet, hidden beneath this frozen continent, under the quietest place on Earth, something ancient could awaken. The mystery begins in 2013, when a multinational research team drilling near Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake buried under more than 3 kilometers of Antarctic ice, detected a series of pressure anomalies far below the surface. Their mission was to explore microbial life in isolated waters, trapped for millions of years under the ice sheet. But what they found wasn't just bacteria. It was space, empty space, a void that shouldn't have existed. Initial data showed a vast, air-filled chamber nearly 90 meters high and over 1.5 kilometers wide hidden inside the ice shelf. The cavity wasn't filled with liquid water or sediment. It was hollow, eerily hollow, and according to laser depth readings, perfectly arched like the inside of a dome. There was no geological explanation. Natural ice formations don't create smooth, symmetrical chambers. much less on that scale. It wasn't the only anomaly. Before the researchers could lower a probe into the hollow, their equipment began failing. Temperatures spiked unpredictably, readings fluctuated beyond calibration, and pressure sensors gave contradictory results, as if the void's shape was changing. Some team members believed it was simply interference caused by ice movement. Others weren't so sure. Then the recordings had arrived. Using low-frequency radar pulses to map the interior, the team observed rhythmic echoes coming from inside the void, too regular to be seismic activity and too inconsistent to be natural resonance. The pulses repeated at intervals of 31 seconds. When processed with audio enhancement software, the signal resembled a deep hum that slowly increased in pitch and then cut off abruptly, as if something silenced it just before completion. In private diaries that were leaked to the public, one of the lead scientists wrote, "It doesn't look like geology. It sounds like something breathing, something deep." The team didn't stay long after that. In a matter of days, the expedition was canceled. The funding disappeared. The station was closed to review the equipment. Official reports did not mention the gap. When asked, the investigating organization denied any irregular findings and attributed the anomalies to instrument calibration errors due to the variability of ice density. But the raw data was never made public. The radar records disappeared, and several of the scientists quietly left the field. But the ice did not stop moving. In 2017, satellites monitoring the West Antarctic ice sheet captured a phenomenon known as a gravitational anomaly near the location of the Vostok Gap. The gravitational field of the area fluctuated drastically over a 24-hour period, enough to cause small irregularities in the tides thousands of kilometers away. No earthquakes were detected on the surface, nor meteorite impacts, just a sudden force pulling down, as if the Earth itself had breathed in. That same year, amateur radio operators from Tierra del Fuego captured a low-frequency transmission unlike anything they had heard before. It was weak, barely stronger than the background noise, but it contained a signal embedded in the noise. Slow pulses with 12-second intervals, then silence. The pulses repeated every hour for 9 days, and then ceased. Independent analysts traced the origin to Antarctica, more precisely to the same coordinates as the gap under Lake Vostok. The Antarctic Treaty prohibits any military activity on the continent. But in 2018, satellite images began to show a strange increase in logistical flights to and from research stations near the area. White cargo planes without markings, strange convoys, without insignia, and long nights with spotlights shining against the snow, illuminating nothing. And then the rumors arose. Personnel stationed nearby began reporting strange dreams. Dreams of huge underground rooms, of curved walls that vibrated, of a deep sound always present, like a heartbeat. Some even spoke of seeing something under the ice, not a structure, but a shape. They described it as something organic, huge, asleep. Of course, they were just stories. Antarctica is a place that encourages isolation. The human mind twists with the cold, but the frequency, the hum, kept coming back. Always the same, always just below the surface like a memory. A theory that is only shared in classified circles is that the gap under Vostok is not a void, but a chamber, a waiting room. Though at rest there is not. Part of our world as we understand it, that it was placed there, not born, and that the ice is not its prison, but its shell. There's a legend, told by the Sami people of the north, about a great thing sleeping under the world, trapped in the cold and silence, whose dreams spread across the earth like distant thunder. They call it Unnu, which means the one who forgets. They say that when it wakes up, it will remember everything. Perhaps the void under the ice is the breath of something ancient. Perhaps the signal is not calling but answering. Or maybe it's just the ice moving as always, explaining nothing, revealing just enough to keep us awake. But one thing is certain. Since that day in 2013, no expedition has returned to that exact point under the Vostok station. And every winter, when the sun disappears from Antarctica for weeks, The instruments that remained there continued to record faint vibrations, like footsteps coming from the depths. Part 10. The submerged town that still rings the bells. There's a sound characteristic of small towns, the slow creaking of the shutters in the wind, the creaking of boots on the compact earth, the distant peal of a church bell fading into the morning fog. These sounds transmit security. They are rooted in human rhythm. But when the town has disappeared, when the people have left, when the buildings are underwater, what does it mean if the bell keeps ringing? In the north of Italy, nestled in the Alps, there's a lake called Largo d'Aria. For the occasional traveler, it is a picturesque view. Turquoise water surrounded by snowy mountains. A calm mass of water that attracts hikers and photographers throughout the year. But in its center, something breaks the surface. A tower, eroded by the stone, old, that rises directly from the lake, as if it grew from the water itself. It is not a sculpture or a ruin. It is the last vestige of a submerged town. The tower belonged to the old church of Chiron, a small town with centuries of history. In its day, it was the home of farmers and artisans who lived quietly in the shadow of the mountains. In 1950, the town was deliberately flooded to create an artificial reservoir, part of a hydroelectric project intended to boost Italy's recovery after the war. The government relocated the residents, demolished most of the buildings, and built a dam that submerged the valley under 30 meters of water. But they did not demolish the church tower. It was too structurally solid, too emblematic, so they left it behind, alone and ghostly in the middle of the lake, with its pointed roof rising above the surface like a memory refusing to drown. At first, it was just a curiosity. Tourists came to take pictures. The local children challenged each other to row to its base. In winter, when the lake froze, the villagers walked on the ice to stand under the tower and wonder what else was down there. But then strange things began to happen. It all started with rumors. People who strolled along the shore of the lake at night claimed to hear bells ringing from the tower, soft, faint, as if heard through layers of water. Some heard a single chime, others a series, always at sunset, always when the fog was thickest. The problem is that the bell had been removed before the flood. There is no bell inside the tower. However, the sound persisted. Visitors staying in nearby houses began reporting strange dreams after strolling along the shore of the lake. Dreams in which they walked through streets under the water, with windows shining under the surface. A woman described dreaming of an underwater door that opened into a lit room where people were sitting around a table, motionless, as if waiting. She had never been to Chiron. She had no reason to know that the church was formerly next to the town's main square, right in front of the town hall, which in turn overlooked a large community dining room used for local festivals. Others spoke of lights under the lake, faint flashes that moved through the water like lanterns. Divers who tried to explore the submerged ruins discovered that compasses did not work near the tower and that electronic equipment frequently failed. The cameras turned off and the lights dimmed. Those who remained submerged for too long complained of headaches from the pressure and a strange sensation of being watched, not from below, but from above. One diver claimed that, during an especially quiet descent, he looked up and saw a face on the surface watching him. It had no features, just the outline of a head. When he resurfaced, there was nothing there anymore. There is no record of any corpses being left behind during the flood. The town was evacuated. The residents moved, but according to local folklore, not everyone left. A woman refused to leave the church, claiming that the town had made a pact with the land and that breaking it would awaken something old that still lay buried under the hills. It is said that she locked herself in the church during the last days, ringing the bell again and again until the waters began to rise. There is no record of her name or tomb, only stories. In 2009, during a temporary drop in the water level for maintenance work, the base of the tower was exposed. Archaeologists carried out a brief study and unexpectedly found several stone markers embedded in the ground that did not match the church's age. The symbols were neither Latin nor Italian. Some seemed chiseled into the foundations, perhaps long before the church was built. A researcher pointed out they resembled Etruscan funerary patterns, although the place had never been an official necropolis. That week, an old man from the area, a former resident of Curon who was a child during the floods, suffered a fatal stroke. According to his caregiver, in the hours before his death, he kept repeating a phrase in Lardine, the old local dialect. They stayed with the bell. They took it down there. But no bell has ever been found. In 2020, images taken by drone at night showed a faint glow around the tower's tip. It lasted less than 6 seconds and was dismissed as lens flare, but video analysts later noted the glow had shape, an almost circular aura that expanded and contracted like a pulse. Local authorities refused further investigation. Today, the town of Curon Venasta, rebuilt on higher ground, embraces its legend. The tower appears on postcards. The bell that does not exist is mentioned in the brochures, but those who live closer to the lake. Families descended from the original residents avoid the shore at sunset. They do not walk on the ice when it freezes. And they never mention the sound of the bell because sometimes it rings 3 times. And the third touch means someone is coming home. They say that if you are alone on the lake and hear that third touch, you should not look toward the tower. You should not walk towards it. And, above all, you should not listen to what follows because it will sound as if someone is calling you by name, and it will sound exactly like someone you loved who drowned long ago. Part 11. The sound that lives in the coral under the surface of the sea, where the sunlight dissolves into blue and the pressure begins to shape the world into strange shapes. Coral reefs whisper. Most people think reefs are silent and static sculptures full of fish, but for those who listen carefully, they are never still. They crackle, hum, beat with the silent sound of life. But on a deep reef off the coast of Papua New Guinea, researchers found a sound that did not belong. A sound that, by all standards of science, should not exist. In 2015, a team of marine biologists set out to study coral restoration in a remote region of the Solomon Sea. Their goal was simple: to deploy underwater microphones called hydrophones to monitor the acoustic health of the reef using the ambient noise of marine life to estimate biodiversity. A healthy reef is a noisy one. The snaps of crustaceans, the grunts of fish, the snap of shrimp claws like underwater static. Silence, on the other hand, is a sign of a dying ecosystem. At first, the recordings seemed normal. The coral, although damaged in places, was alive. The microphones captured the expected chorus of sounds, especially during sunrise and sunset, when marine activity peaks. But on the 5th day, during a night recording, the hydrophones captured something different. A low, vibrant tone, long and constant, almost like a cello string played with a bow far below the waves. It lasted 42 seconds, and then there was silence. They assumed it was mechanical interference, perhaps a boat, or even a slight earthquake producing resonance through the water, but no seismic activity was recorded that night. There were no boats nearby, and the reef was far from any industrial area. The following night, it happened again. At the same time, with the same frequency and the same duration, 42 seconds. They started recording continuously. Over the next 2 weeks, the sound was repeated every night, always at 2:46 a.m. and m. local time, always with the same duration, always with the same tone, low, deep, and strangely melodic, as if trying to imitate a human voice humming in the dark. When the team analyzed the waveform, they discovered something disturbing. The vibration was not just sound, it had structure. The pitch fluctuated with mathematical precision, rising and falling in a wavy pattern every 3 seconds, creating a modulated rhythm more complex than any natural source they had studied. It did not resemble any known whale call, seismic signal, or geological resonance. Then, a week after starting the recordings, something new appeared beneath the sound. A second frequency, higher and more acute. It was not a melody, not even a word, just a pattern of ascending chirps, as if something was tuning, aligning to the more grave tone. It began 2 minutes after the main tone started, then faded. In the next recording, it began after a minute, then 30 seconds, then began to overlap with the main tone, writhing around it, adjusting to it, responding. It was as if something deep within the reef was learning. One of the researchers, a a young acoustics specialist named Arya Dev, became obsessed with the signal. She isolated the tones and superimposed them on data about ocean temperature, lunar phases, and tide charts. She found no correlation, but then she tried something different. She slowed the sound down tenfold and played it again. It was still not a language, but something did not fit. It was familiar in a way that caused a knot in the stomach, like a lullaby sung in a language that your body remembered, but your mind did not. The team brought in outside consultants. A sound engineer from Tokyo noticed harmonics in the signal, similar to the harmonic chants used in Tibetan rituals. A cryptologist from an Australian university found sequences in the waveform resembling the numerical patterns used in early communication protocols. Still, there was no source. The hydrophones were triangulated. The signal was always strongest at the center of the reef. A dive was scheduled. 3 divers descended with lights, cameras, and secondary audio equipment. The visibility was clear. The growth of the corals was strong. The activity of the fish was normal. But near the center of the reef, the divers discovered a dead zone, an area of coral that looked bleached, but not from heat. It was as if something had taken its life force. The coral skeletons were still intact, but with a hollow appearance, smooth to the touch, too smooth. And then something strange occurred. The divers reported a sudden, overwhelming pressure in their ears. It was not pain, but a vibration similar to that felt when being too close to a speaker. The water itself felt heavy and wrong. They began to hear the sound not in their ears, but inside their bodies. Vibrations in the bones, in the chest, a wordless voice, a tone without meaning, but full of weight. It was not mechanical. It was alive. They surfaced ahead of schedule. Their images showed nothing unusual, just coral, empty space, calm water. But their instruments captured the sound again, this time louder, richer, as if the reef had recognized them. Back in the laboratory, Arya superimposed the last signal onto all the previous recordings. A new rhythm emerged, not only musical, but rotational. It pulsed with the same cadence as the human resonances of Earth. Extremely low-frequency waves that occur naturally between the surface of Earth and the ionosphere. The reef was echoing the electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth. Or maybe it was not an echo. Perhaps it was generating it. That theory was quickly dismissed. The funding was withdrawn. The research team was reassigned. The name of the project, Echo Study of Coral 7, was removed from the university website. But a report, a draft that was never published, described the reef as an amplifier of biological signals capable of shaping not only the acoustic space, but also electromagnetic fields. In simpler terms, the coral did not only sing. It transmitted to someone, but nobody knew who. Some believe it is an emerging intelligence, life born not of cells or neurons, but of vibration itself. Others believe that the reef is a conduit, lens, or door that goes into the depths of the ocean under the crust of biology. Language is pressure, meaning is rhythm, and the reef does nothing more than repeat something that was whispered to it a long time ago. The reef continues to exist, but has been declared an area of ecological protection, prohibited to unauthorized research. Local fishermen refuse to cast their nets nearby. They say the fish there are different, too calm. Their scales shine strangely in the light. A man claimed he hauled up a net of translucent jellyfish. All of them pulsed in unison with a sound that could be felt in one's teeth. And sometimes at night, the coast hums. Without waves or wind, only a soft, grave tone of 42 seconds in duration. Then silence. Part 12. The diving bell returned empty. In 1968, during a series of tests in the deep waters of the North Atlantic, a specialized diving bell was launched from a French research vessel near the Azores, a region known for its tectonic instability and geological mysteries. The mission seemed simple on paper: to send 2 divers in the newly reinforced bell to test its resistance during prolonged immersion at extreme depths. The bell, called Marinoir, was a marvel of engineering for its time, capable of descending more than 3,000 m and maintaining constant internal pressure and communication. The two chosen men were veterans of the depths, experts in prolonged confinement, accustomed to the unique claustrophobia of oceanic descent. Jean Lemaitre and Henry Voss were calm, methodical, and faithful to procedure. They entered the bell on the morning of July 3rd. The descent began at 8:17. The initial transmissions seemed normal. They reported small creaks as pressure increased and described the glow of bioluminescent creatures as sunlight disappeared above. At 2300 m, Ari mentioned a faint vibration, not mechanical, not from the bell, but something external. He said it was like a deep drumbeat that appeared and disappeared every few minutes. At first, the crew assumed it was a distant tremor. They recorded it and continued their descent. At 29:10 m, Gene's voice returned, but sounded different, calmer. He reported seeing something outside the window. "It is not a fish," he said. "It does not move. It is watching." There was a pause, then a gasp. The transmission continued, but now both men were speaking at the same time, in a low voice, hurried, overlapping with nervous tones. The technicians on the surface asked for clarification. There was no answer, only the dull hum of the bell's internal systems. Then the signal cut out. Emergency procedure started. The winch system began recovery immediately. The process, which should have taken an hour, lasted almost 3. The winch kept getting stuck. The cable pressure fluctuated as if something resisted. Finally, at 11:44, Marinoir surfaced. It was intact. There were no holes or visible damage. But when opened, the bell was empty. There were no signs of a struggle. The seats were still tied down. The controls still intact. The emergency oxygen tanks were unused. Both suits had disappeared, but the interior was dry. The pressure had remained constant, and no hatch had broken. The only anomaly was in the recordings. The last 90 seconds of audio that were lost were recovered from the backup on board. They began with Jean whispering almost reverently, "It is not outside anymore." Then silence, and then Henry quietly, "Do not open it. It is already inside." The last sound was not human. It was deep, guttural, and harmonic, like a chord played in a cathedral, but strange, dissonant. A sound that shook the instruments, and then static. An investigation was opened. The official conclusion was equipment failure and possible psychosis due to deep sea pressure. The case was closed, but in private the engineering team insisted that the pressure had been maintained. The systems had worked perfectly. Jean and Hari did not implode. They did not escape. They were taken out. In the following months, strange things happened near the crash site. A British submarine conducting unrelated exercises captured what they described as vocal sonar, repeating acoustic pulses in a language-like pattern emanating from the pit. Divers sent to investigate reported hearing whispers in their headphones even when they were not connected to the surface. One diver surfaced in a panic, claiming he had seen Jean standing on the seabed, arms raised, motionless. The Navy blocked off the area shortly after. The Marinoir was detained by French intelligence and locked in a secure hangar in Brest. Years later, during a minor maintenance check, a technician opened the cabin for a routine inspection. The interior was damp, somewhat unusual, but not unknown. What disturbed him was not the humidity. It was always written on the interior wall, with salt residue, a phrase written in large, rough lines. We took off our masks. The water breathes now for us. The technician left the field the next day. To date, no other diving bell has been deployed to the same depth in that region. Satellite scanners show nothing unusual, but deep-frequency hydrophones continue to pick up strange harmonics coming from the pit. Sounds that rise and fall like a slow breath, always between 2900 and 3000 m. Some believe that what the men came across does not live in our conception of time. It is not a creature, nor a machine, but a space, a presence, a logic that does not belong to this world. Some even believe that the Marinoir did not fail, that it worked exactly as planned, that it took them where they should not go, and that something else returned. What happened under the waves that morning in 1968 was never mentioned again, neither in official reports nor in documentaries, only in low rooms lit by red emergency bulbs, among those who still work on the margins of classified maritime operations. And when they mention the name Marinoir, they speak quietly because the bell returned and was still ringing. Part 13. The ship that returned without time. In 1974, a weather station located on a remote Norwegian island detected a ship slowly entering the fjord. It was early in the morning, the sky was cloudy, and there was no ship scheduled in the area for at least 2 weeks. The ship appeared without warning, no signals, no distress calls, no previous trace on the radar. The sea was calm, but the ship moved strangely, almost reluctantly, as if it was being pushed against its will. At first, the station crew thought it might be an abandoned ship, but as they approached they realized it had power. The lights flickered weakly on the upper deck, and a slight mechanical hum was audible through the fog. The ship had no markings, no name on its hull, no flag, no identification numbers. The metallic coating was deformed in some places, as if it had been burned or melted, but there were no signs of impact or corrosion. It seemed modern, yet strange, designed to travel the ocean, but with architecture that no one recognized. Long corridors with too many doors, decks too close, windows in places where there should be none. The authorities were alerted. A Norwegian patrol boat was dispatched to establish contact. When the officers boarded, the ship was silent. Not abandoned, but silent. All systems appeared to be on, but no crew could be found. There was half-eaten food in the dining room. A kettle had run dry. Several clocks on board had stopped, but each marked a different time. Even more disturbing, none of the digital devices worked, even though the power indicators were lit. The data logs were encoded, full of indecipherable symbols. The navigation system on board, when restarted, showed a map of the North Atlantic, but the continents were distorted. The coasts were deformed, like a dream of Earth more than a real representation. None of the coordinates matched the real world's geography. A diary was found in the captain's cabin. Its pages were full of detailed and meticulous writing, but in no known language. The writing was tight, with loops and slightly raised, almost in relief on the paper, as if pressed instead of written. On the last page, there was a single line in English. "We keep drifting. Time chases us." The patrol team withdrew, and the ship was towed to a secure naval facility on the mainland. More anomalies were discovered during the following days. The ship's hull was composed of a titanium alloy that did not match any known commercial or military specification. Samples taken for analysis showed anomalous isotopic ratios, incompatible with terrestrial manufacturing. Radiation levels on board were slightly elevated, not dangerous, but higher than background and isolated in certain rooms that appeared to be unused. Even stranger were the sound recordings. The engineers discovered that, when the ship's ventilation systems were off, a slight hum could be heard in all corridors. It was not electric or mechanical. It was rhythmic, pulsing at intervals of exactly 1,618 seconds. The golden ratio, often found in natural patterns such as shells, galaxies, and DNA. Audio recordings of the hum, when analyzed spectrographically, showed an underlying structure similar to harmonic resonance, with frequencies stacked in geometric sequences too perfect to be random. One analyst compared it to the singing of whales through a crystal lens. Another described it as language reduced to tones. A theory began to emerge, not officially, but among those who worked in secret, that the ship had not disappeared, that it had gone somewhere else, that it had slipped, not in space, but in chronology, that it had departed from a version of Earth that was no longer in sync with ours, a pocket, a fracture, a curve in time, where the familiar is rearranged. They believed that the crew had not disappeared. They were simply no longer in sync. Their molecules no longer resonated at this reality's frequency. Some thought they had disintegrated. Others whispered that they were still on board, invisible, displaced, watching from behind a veil. Security cameras installed on the lower decks of the ship recorded 96 hours of absolute silence. Exactly at 3:33 a.m. in hour 97. Movement was detected, but not footsteps or movement in a conventional sense. The temperature in the storage hold dropped 9 degrees Celsius in 6 seconds, then rose and fell again. The light bulbs dimmed. One exploded. In the images, static flickered across the frame. Shapes emerged. Vague, humanoid, but distorted. They did not walk. They unfolded. Long, slow movements. Like smoke rising underwater. The images were deleted internally 3 minutes later, as if the ship had accessed and erased them from the system. Only one frame remained. A still image of an empty corridor, except for a shadow without origin. At the end of the week, the ship's engines activated on their own, without prior notice. The navigation controls were locked. The moorings broke, the alarms went off, but no one could stop it. The ship moved away from the port, accelerating slowly as if dragged by something invisible. The helicopters followed it for 8 kilometers until it entered a bank of low fog over the open sea and disappeared. It simply vanished. There was no trace on the radar, no heat signature, nothing. Since then, reports have been scattered. The crew of a container ship in the North Sea saw a strange vessel on the horizon for 3 minutes before it disappeared. A signal repeater station in Greenland captured a 20-second data burst that matched the corrupt records of the original boarding. And in 2021, a fishing boat off the coast of New Finland received an automatic distress signal on a long-abandoned frequency. The message was distorted, but 2 words were clearly understood: still adrift. Now, a story circulates among certain naval operators. They say, if you see a ship without a flag, one that appears melted down and rebuilt in the dark, never get close. You must turn off the engines, let yourself drift with the current, let it pass, and above all, do not answer the radio, regardless of the voice you hear, because time does not always remain where it should be. Sometimes it deviates, and other times it returns in search of the rest of itself. Part 14. The Submarine That the Surface Forgot. In the spring of 1983, at the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Navy launched a secret experimental mission in the depths of the Sea of Okhotsk, a cold and remote oceanic area east of Siberia. The objective was simple but classified: to test a new type of deep reconnaissance submarine called K-29A, capable of remaining hidden for long periods, both from sonar and satellites. Officially, the ship did not exist. There were no launching ceremonies or crew lists. It set sail under cover of night with 57 men on board and a navigation plan that only 2 officers were authorized to read. 3 weeks after the mission started, the K-29A stopped communicating. The disappearance, although alarming, was not entirely unexpected. The submarine was designed for silent operations in deep water, and long periods of silence were part of the protocol. But by the 6th week, without even an intermittent transmission, the command structure began to worry. The search efforts were launched. The satellites were redirected. Sonar networks tracked the sea from Kamchatka to Hokkaido. Nothing. The submarine had disappeared. Its loss was declared silently. The official cause was implosion due to hull failure at an extreme depth. The families of the crew were told that there had been an accident during a training exercise. Closed casket funerals were held without corpses. The mission was erased from military records, and the K-2129A sank into rumor. Just another ghost swallowed by the Pacific until it returned. 5 years later, in 1988, a Japanese cargo ship heading to Anchorage reported a radar contact near the international dateline. A vessel briefly surfaced and disappeared again in a matter of minutes. The signal was strange, too slow to be a plane and too fast for a fishing boat. Its shape was unknown, but unmistakably naval. The Japanese Coast Guard reviewed the images. The experts identified it with disbelief as a Soviet submarine of the Gulf class, an obsolete model at the time. But this one had markings that nobody recognized. The command tower did not carry a flag, just a white symbol in the shape of an incomplete circle. There were also other details that did not add up. The hull seemed asymmetrical. The armor was deformed, as if someone who did not know how it was built originally had repaired it. When Soviet authorities were informed, they denied everything. The submarine was not theirs. They accused the Japanese of propaganda. But in private, Soviet analysts began to panic because, when enhancing the images, they saw the identification plate under the K-29A tower, the submarine that had disappeared 5 years before. No distress signals or beacons had been sent, and yet now it was there. The United States Navy soon became interested in the matter. The archived sonar data was reviewed. Only a few days before, a low-frequency anomaly had been recorded in that region. It sounded like metal rubbing against rocks at an impossible depth, then silence, then its appearance. A plan was drawn up to intercept it. A reconnaissance ship was sent from Alaska to try and establish contact. They never got close. When the American ship approached, a sudden fog rose from the ocean's surface, dense and abnormally uniform. The instruments failed, compass readings reversed, lights dimmed, and in the distance, through the fog, a dark, damp, barely floating shape was glimpsed. The submarine. One of the crew members reported that he had seen figures on the deck, men in Soviet uniforms, but they remained motionless and rigid, as if posing, and their eyes, he said, were too dark, too reflective, like water in human form. Then, without a sound, the ship submerged again beneath the surface. Not a ripple, not a noise, it simply disappeared. When divers were finally sent weeks later to explore the location where the point on the radar was last seen, they found something nobody could explain. At the bottom of the ocean was a footprint in the sediment, an outline of the exact size and shape of the K-29A, as if it had been there for a while. But the sediment pattern did not match. It had not been deposited over years. It was recent, from a few days prior. But under the footprint was a layer of fossilized coral, thousands of years old, bent and compressed by pressure that no modern submarine should have been able to exert. The place was sealed, the images classified, but rumors spread. The crew members began to talk about the cold chamber, a compartment in the depths of the K-129A, which was rumored to have been added just before its launch. Nobody knew what it was for, only that it was lined with copper and always sealed. Some speculated that it was a listening chamber. Others said it was a vault, a containment zone for something dredged from the seabed during a previous mission, a fragment of metal or something older. What is known or believed is that the K-129A had gone somewhere it should not have. Not simply to great depth, but to another place. That it crossed a threshold in the structure of the sea where distance ceases to be linear and time begins to bend. That the ocean, under certain pressures and geometries, becomes a lens and something beyond that lens. Looking back, the submarine was never seen after 1988. But every few years, near the same place, strange things are detected. Metallic echoes from the depths of the Earth's crust. Pressure pulses without origin. And once, in 1999, a single burst of radio was captured by an old Soviet receiver, a remnant of the Cold War. A Russian voice, hoarse and broken, with static on the surface. Different time, it is slow. We are not complete. The message lasted 12 seconds before being cut off. When analyzing it, its trajectory did not go back to the Pacific. It came from the Arctic, thousands of kilometers away. The sea has no cemeteries, but it keeps records. And sometimes, when the coordinates align and the pressure suffices, it opens its cracks. Not for the living, but for what still moves in darkness. For what never sank completely. For what went to another place and found its way back. The cold chamber remains sealed. And somewhere under the waves, the hull of the K-29 keeps humming, not because of the engines, but because of something waiting to get out. Part 15. The tunnel under the waves along the south coast of Iceland, where the black sand beaches extend like scars under the glacial cliffs, and the wind always brings with it the smell of something ancient. There's a place that few speak of, not even in whispers. Near the abandoned fishing village of Djupavik, beyond the ruined remains of a forgotten herring factory, there is a stretch of coast where waves behave oddly. They do not break against the rocks. They recede, as if the sea were breathing inward. And in that place, with certain tides, the mouth of a tunnel appears, perfectly round, framed by stones that seem polished by fire, not water. It does not appear on any map. It disappears completely with high tide, submerged under meters of cold Atlantic waves. But for centuries, its existence has persisted in local folklore, transmitted through fragmented myths and drowned stories barely held together by memory and fear. They call it the breath of the Muli, the blood tunnel. According to old legends, the tunnel was once a vein of the earth, a place where something huge and alive breathed through the planet's crust. The Vikings who first settled the land believed it was a wound from when the gods struck the sea with fire. Others say that it was older than the sea itself, that the tunnel did not lead downwards, but through a completely different version of the ocean, one where the laws of water no longer applied. In 1962, a British geological research team mapped the coast and recorded an anomaly in bedrock near Djupavik. A cavity, not a cave, a tunnel almost 500 meters long, perfectly symmetrical, which descended at a constant angle under the coast and extended far below sea level. No seismic activity could explain its formation. Lava tubes do not reach such depths. Glacial erosion leaves chaos, not symmetry. The chief geologist, Dr. Howard Minton, presented a private report to the Arctic Division of NATO, suggesting the tunnel could be a formation of interest for advanced exploratory technologies. The following year, he resigned and disappeared from public records. In 1974, an Icelandic diver named Elvar Burnin attempted to explore the tunnel during a record low tide. He entered with a headlamp, a safety rope, and a submersible camera system. According to the video images, the tunnel walls were lined with black stone that shone slightly even without light. As Elvar descended deeper, his breathing changed, slower, rhythmic, effortless, but measured. The line remained taut. The audio went silent, except for the sound of dripping water. Then, after 27 minutes, the rope tightened as if someone was pulling it. The camera turned and captured a brief image of something impossible. A wall of water that did not enter forcefully, but rose vertically from below, as if the ocean was falling upwards. Elvar's last recorded words were calm, almost hypnotized. "It is not dark here. There is light that comes from the stone, then static." The team pulled on the line, but it returned loose and frayed, cleanly cut, as if it had been cut with something sharp and burning. Elvar's body was never recovered. In the following years, the tunnel became taboo. The locals stopped fishing near it. The scientists stopped asking questions. But deep within the classified oceanographic records, the tunnel continues to be monitored. Sensors placed around the seabed record periodic bursts of low-frequency vibrations. Every 17 days, exactly at 3 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, a harmonic pulse propagates from within. It lasts exactly 11 seconds. The shape of the wave does not match any natural pattern. It resembles a heartbeat. Some believe the tunnel is not a tunnel, but a mouth, a breath. That under the bark, not far from the mid-Atlantic ridge, something dreams. Not as animals dream, but as tectonic plates shift slowly, inevitably, and the tunnel is their throat. A declassified photograph, taken in 1991 by a Norwegian satellite, shows the coast during a winter storm. The tide has receded to sea. The tunnel is visible, open, wide, and steaming. But there is something else within the image. A shape partially hidden by the fog and shadows that emerges from the mouth of the tunnel. It is not human. It is not a machine. It does not cast any reflection on the wet rock. It is tall, curved, segmented, like the skeleton of something that once moved through water, but now moves through time. The image was buried. Today, the area around Djupavik is cordoned off under the pretext of environmental instability. The old road has been shut. The few towns that remain do not speak about the tunnel, not from superstition, but from experience. A fisherman named Unni, now in his 80s, once told a journalist that when he was a child, he saw a light coming out of the water during a storm. It was not lightning, but a light like a lantern held under the waves, swaying slowly. And under that glow, a sound like bells underwater was heard, slow and deep. He said he never returned. The journalist asked what he thought was down there, and he looked at the sea a long time and whispered, "What not? When?" Because if the tunnel is not just a hole in the Earth's crust, but a path between versions of the ocean, between eras of the sea, then perhaps what awaits us at the bottom is neither ancient nor future, but something that exists in both. Something that the ocean remembers, even if we do not. Something that should never have been discovered. And every 17 days, it breathes and waits for someone to follow. Part 16. The Lighthouse That Counted Waves. A stretch of ocean between Newfoundland and Greenland, known for its cruel climate and sudden fogs. A place where storms form without warning and remain without reason. Ships avoid this corridor whenever they can. Pilots plot their routes. The old sailors called it the counting water, and it earned its name for the rhythm of the waves, perfectly spaced, with a uniform pulse, as if the ocean followed some hidden metronome. Regardless of the season or sky, the waves always arrived in series of 7. 7 low waves, then silence, then 7 more, as if something huge under the surface was breathing. On the edge of this corridor, in 1912, a small cast-iron lighthouse was built on a rock formation barely large enough to house it. It was called the Cape Sulis Lighthouse, a thin tower painted red and white, barely 15 meters high, with enough space inside for a single lighthouse keeper and provisions for some weeks. It was built to guide steamships beyond the cliff where the seabed plunges into a trench darker than anywhere in the Atlantic. Cape Sulis was manned for 38 years. In that time, 5 lighthouse keepers were assigned. 2 requested transfer in a matter of weeks. 1 disappeared without any explanation. The last 2 brothers were found sitting at the foot of the lamp, with their eyes open, their mouths closed, and not breathing. They showed no injuries or sign of struggle. The diary near their bodies was open to a page. The last entry said, "The 7th wave arrived, and we heard counting." After that, Cape Sulis was decommissioned. The light went out. The structure was left to rust. The official reason was the inefficiency in the costs, but the locals knew that it was not like that. They said the lighthouse was never meant to guide ships. It was built to mark something for observation. For years, the tower remained empty. Then, in 1977, during a peak of strange readings on the sonar off the coast, a private oceanographic company obtained permission to use the lighthouse as a base to store equipment. 3 researchers stayed in the place for 9 days. On the 10th day, the main ship received a transmission from the tower. The voice on the line was distorted, as if underwater. "It is counting again," the voice said. It reached 7, but the water did not stop. Then silence. When the ship arrived at the lighthouse, it was empty. There was no blood or sign of damage. The equipment was intact, but the logbooks had vanished. The only thing out of place was a hand-drawn map glued to the wall with 7 red XS in a spiral, each with a date. All the dates were in the future. The next day, a magnitude 62 earthquake was recorded under the Atlantic Trench. It was followed by a burst of low-frequency noise lasting exactly 77 seconds. Submarines patrolling nearby reported temporary loss of navigation. The compasses spun, depth gauges failed. A sonar technician said he heard voices in the static, overlapping, whispering nonstop. The official report called it interference caused by deep tectonic activity. But no more missions were approved near Cape Sulis. And yet, every year since, on the transmission's anniversary, meteorologists in the region capture a repetitive wave pattern. 7 pulses, then a pause, then 7 again. Ships passing through the corridor report radio interference exactly at midnight UTC. Some captains say they hear a bell that rings once for each wave. In 2005, a digital mapping satellite captured something beneath the surface, a shape not metallic or of stone, organic and large enough to cast a shadow of 9 square miles on the seabed. The image was hidden. The team was reassigned, but a technician kept a copy and later spoke to a friend off the record. He said that the structure wasn't simply there. It was arranged curve in a perfect spiral, like a nautilus, a kakali, an ear glued to the earth listening. When asked what he thought it listened to, he replied, "There is now an idea among the few who still study the Sulis records that the waves aren't caused by wind or gravity. There are signals that don't come from above, but from something below, that measure us and send messages in series of 7. The seventh wave is always the biggest, always strongest. But maybe it's not about strength. Maybe it's a threshold, a call. And when that seventh wave reaches shore, something on land answers. The lighthouse is still standing. Satellite images show the rust has intensified. The lens broke a long time ago, but unlike the rock that supports it, the structure itself has not moved in decades. Not even during storms. The tower does not move. It casts no shadow at sunset. The tide does not reach its base. And every night, exactly at 3:07 a.m., a faint light is seen in the upper window. There is no electricity on the island. They say that if you get close enough, you can hear a sound that crosses the water, a low ticking, 7 slow ticks, in silence, and then 7 more. The sea is counting, and when it finishes counting us, nobody knows what happens afterward. Part 17. The black net under the bay. In the coastal waters off the southeastern tip of Japan, where the Pacific begins to darken and descend towards the Kroyo Current, there is a bay so calm that fishermen call it Yumi, the sleeping sea. The waves barely whisper, even during storms. The boats slide on its surface without resistance, as if the water itself did not want to be disturbed. And when they cast their nets, they are careful not to drag them too deep. Because every few decades, something emerges that nobody can explain. Something intertwined, woven, loaded with memories, something not made for the air. The first recorded incident was in 1923, when a coastal fishing boat returning from a morning outing dragged what was described as an enormous black curtain entangled with seaweed and bones. It was slippery and fibrous-like. Seaweed, but more resistant to knives, impossible to break. It was perfectly symmetrical, braided in a pattern of tight rhombuses that resembled a net, but the openings were too small for fish to pass through. Some sailors touched it. One swore it vibrated. Another said it was hot. Within hours, 2 men began vomiting salt water. Another suffered convulsions. The net was thrown back into the ocean. The story became legend, but from time to time, once every generation, it seems that someone pulls out a piece again. In 1966, an underwater drone sent to study the layers of sediments under Yumi sent images that were quietly archived and never made public. The video showed long strands of black material covering the seabed, extending hundreds of meters in all directions, something that was neither natural nor geological. The strands swayed in perfect synchrony without any current moving them, as if something below was breathing slowly and deeply. The research team financed by a university consortium prepared for a follow-up immersion. This was canceled without explanation. The chief oceanographer abandoned his post 3 weeks later. The archived images were discreetly relabeled as corrupt, but the black net had already begun to appear elsewhere. In 1981, during the construction of an underwater cable line, a team recovered a piece of unknown fiber wrapped tightly around the steel conduit. Attempts to burr it failed. Chemical analysis revealed carbon structures so dense that they defied any known classification. A single strand placed under a scanning electron microscope revealed a pattern of microholes separated exactly 18 microns from each other. The golden ratio, not by chance but by design. No marine organism produces such material. Then came the sounds. The fishermen who worked in the bay began to report strange noises under the hull. Low metallic growls, too deep to be wails, that repeated at intervals during the early hours. The nets began to come back empty, without breaks, simply empty, as if something below had already taken everything before the net arrived. The divers stopped volunteering. In 1994, a satellite flying over the bay captured an anomaly in the thermal image, a circular cold vacuum, almost a kilometer wide, right in the center of Yumi. The ocean does not maintain stable temperatures in such formations without reason. Underwater mapping showed no trench, no cave, no volcanic activity, just a drop in temperature, as if something large and without light was absorbing it. Then, One day, the net reappeared on the surface. It was 2008. A commercial fishing operation, working deeper than most regulations allow, brought a section of the black net to the surface so large that it took 3 boats to lift it. Inside, there were no fish, only water trapped in narrow, trembling bags, as if the net had sealed itself into bubbles. The water within these bags was different. It had no salt, bacteria, or trace elements. It was perfectly clear and sterile, as if taken from the sea after the net had filtered it. The terrified fishermen cut the corridor and returned to the coast. One man suffered a complete collapse. Another was hospitalized after claiming his skin remembered touching the threads. He said the net was alive, that he listened through his bones. After that, the government declared the bay's center a restricted area, alleging geological instability. Public access was prohibited. Surveillance drones were authorized, but the buzzing persisted. The fishermen continued to hear faint dragging sounds in the depths, and from time to time, a small boat disappears. There are no remains or oil stains. They simply disappear. In 2019, an intern researcher from a nearby university leaked images from a classified sonar scanner taken near the bay's bottom. The scanner showed a dome-shaped structure under sediments, covered with long, filamentous protuberances arranged in spiral rows. The pattern matched the net's design. The structure was almost 2 kilometers wide. It was not stone nor organic, but something in between. The scanner file was deleted days later. The fellow disappeared from registration records. What if the net is not a weapon or trap, but a limit, a perimeter intended to contain, or worse, to measure? Perhaps the threads are part of a system so vast and old that we cannot perceive its full form. Perhaps the sea does not cover it. Perhaps it is the sea. Now, there's a theory whispered by deep-sea theorists and marine anomaly researchers that the net is not a thing, but a question that every time it arises seeks an answer, not from us, but from something even deeper, something that dreams backward. Some believe that the net is closing, that each piece found is part of a countdown of some process. Some believe that we are not fishing in these waters, that they are fishing us, and that, when the last knot is untied, the ocean will rise, not to drown us, but to take us home, wherever or whenever it is. Part 18. The coordinates that should not exist. In 1997, the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded one of the loudest underwater sounds ever captured by human instruments. It came from a remote point in the South Pacific, somewhere west of Chile's southern coast. The sound was low frequency, powerful, and consistent with an animal origin. However, no known marine creature could explain its magnitude. The event was named bloop. It was discussed, debated, then dismissed. But while the bloop captivated the public imagination, something quieter and stranger was happening behind closed doors. Just weeks before the sound was recorded, an unmanned oceanographic station off the coast of Easter Island transmitted a brief signal to its parent network. It was a data packet, normal at first, but labeled with an embedded file that had no explanation. A set of numbers, not of time, pressure, or salinity. Coordinates. The numbers pointed to a location in the Pacific Ocean's depths, not near a trench or on a mountain range's top, only in the open sea. But when the location was plotted, something unusual occurred. All digital mapping systems failed. The grids deformed around the point. The depth profiles were repeated, and in 3 different mapping programs, a warning box appeared. The coordinate path exceeds the defined space's limits. The software could not manage it. As if the location was not on Earth, a private team from a European naval defense contractor became interested. Using a modified Boiskier, they left Valparaiso under the pretext of a hardware test in deep waters. On May 4th, 1997, they arrived at the coordinates. The ocean was calm, the sky clear, and no other ships were seen. They launched a probe, nicknamed Lila, to descend slowly into the depths. The plan was simple: reach the ocean floor, record images, and recover environmental data. The descent began normally, but at 3,800 meters, something strange occurred. Lila stopped descending, but not because it reached the bottom. The cable continued unwinding. The depth gauges continued to increase, but the sonar's signal stayed flat. There were no reflections, no echoes, nothing below it. It was falling into nothing. At 4,500 meters, the probe's internal compass lost calibration. At 5,000, all sensors stopped working except for the camera. The team watched breathlessly as the signal continued to show darkness. Then, during a single frame, the screen flickered. A structure appeared, enormous and curved, not made of stone or metal, but something like polished obsidian, smooth and without joints, as if carved from a single impossibly large substance. The light from Lila illuminated its surface, and for a moment, symbols were seen, engraved in a language that no one recognized. They did not seem old. They seemed pristine. He knew it. Then the transmission cut off. The cable retracted violently, snapping upwards with an unnatural force. The winch became jammed. The metal screeched, and then the mooring line loosened. 3 hours later, all the digital systems aboard the ship failed at once. There was no fire, no sparks, just silence. The screens went black. The clocks reset. The emergency batteries refused to work. It was as if electricity had been removed from the environment. He knew it. Then, a sound was heard. A low, throbbing frequency pierced the hull. It was not strong. It was felt more than heard. The crew described the sensation as being watched by something eyeless. A weight that pressed the inside of my skull and made me feel as if I were inside a question mark. It lasted exactly 4 minutes. When the systems came back online, the GPS position changed. They were 97 nautical miles east of their previous location, impossible without propulsion. The sea conditions had not changed. The engines were still idle. The coordinates they recorded, those of the signal, were now unattainable. All attempts to return met with navigation errors, hardware failures, or dense fog banks materializing from clear skies. Back on land, when the team reviewed the only captured frame, they discovered something stranger. The symbols engraved on the structure were not random. They coincided precisely with the marks of a flooded cave in the Yucatan Peninsula, more than 9,600 kilometers away. Until now, those marks have been classified as being indecipherable. It was believed that they predated the Mayas, but here, in the deepest part of the Pacific, they had appeared again, connected by something older than writing, older than civilization. One of the researchers, a linguist named Lowe, was found days later locked in his apartment, obsessively drawing spiral patterns and repeating a word over and over in his notes. Iroris. Eat new. 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 He knew it. 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 He believed the coordinates did not mark a place, but an edge. A fold in space where something ancient had been sealed. Not buried under the sea, but hidden by geometry. It was not a prison in 3 dimensions, but in equations. He claimed that the symbols were not writing. They were a padlock, and that the signal, the one sent from the abandoned station, was a key. Eat me, eat me, eat me, eat me, eat me, eat me. It had been disconnected for 7 months before the transmission. Without energy, without personnel, without records. The signal had emerged from nothing since then. Others have tried reaching the coordinates. All attempts failed. Some say the ocean reorganizes to protect that place. Others believe that the coordinates are no longer stable, that they move slowly through the sea, always hiding just outside the limit of understanding. But every few years, someone receives the numbers again, always the same, always embedded in unrelated data packets, hidden in weather reports, ship logs, satellite errors, like a whisper caught within the transmission. Nobody knows who or what sends them. Nobody knows what awaits on the threshold, but the coordinates remain active and continue observing. Part 19. The ship in the Mirror Sea, west of Micronesia, deep in a quadrant of the Pacific that does not cross any official maritime route. Sailors speak of a phenomenon so rare that it seems almost like a shared hallucination. They call it the Mirror Sea, an area of the ocean where waves stop moving. It is not calm, nor still, but perfectly reflective, like a black crystal extending infinitely in all directions. It does not appear on nautical charts. It is not mentioned in meteorology manuals. But sailors, especially those who have crossed the Pacific alone at night, know they must avoid it. They say that the mirror sea appears without prior notice and extends enough to trap everything entering it. The radar does not detect anything. The instruments go crazy. Even the wind ceases. But the strangest thing about the mirror sea is not its silence or stillness. It is what is seen within it. Your boat, as it is, floating below you, without being reflected, inverted, as if another ocean extended under the surface. And your vessel, of the same size and with the same structure, exists down there, upside down, following each one of your movements, imitating each rocking. It does not react to your light, but it is there. And if you watch it long enough, it starts to change. In 1971, a Japanese freighter called Kaisha Maru sailed through the region on a chartered route between Singapore and San Francisco. The crew reported a crystalline sea that extended for hours, more reflective than anything they'd seen. The wake of the ship left no trace. The sky reflected so clearly in the water that the horizon disappeared. But what really disturbed them was the second ship below. At first, it followed their movements exactly. But by mid-afternoon, the bridge crew realized that it was starting to deviate slightly. Half a second behind, then a full second, then more. The lower ship stopped imitating course adjustments. A helmsman swore that the reflected crew looked different. The clothes were loose, their movements slower, and their faces pale and stretched. As night fell, the reflected ship had moved completely away. It was still visible, still below them, but it was no longer a reflection. It was independent and looked up. The captain tried to contact Coast Guards by radio. All frequencies were dead. They tried to turn the ship. The rudder did not respond. The engine power dropped 30%, then 40%. The lights dimmed and the sea darkened further, until it seemed that they were floating on ink. The crew was ordered down to the deck. Only the captain and 2 officers remained on the bridge, watching with growing terror as the reflected ship below began to rise, but not towards them. It passed next to them through the surface in silence, without a ripple, and the other ship emerged. It loomed over the water upside down, with its hull dripping a black liquid that did not fall, but rose towards the sky. Its nameplate was visible for only an instant. Kaisho Maru, just like theirs. But the letters were inverted, not reflected, twisted, as if something that did not fully understand the language had rewritten them. And then it disappeared. In the morning, the ocean had returned to normal, agitated and alive. The reflection had disappeared. Also the buzzing that had filled the air during the night. The crew said nothing for the rest of the trip. But when they arrived at the port, they found something waiting. A report stating that the Kaisha Maru had already arrived 2 days before, docked, refueled, and sailed again, signed by the captain, sealed and verified, but no one on board had been there. The fuel had not been touched, the cargo was still sealed, and the sailor listed as first officer in the falsified logbook had died the previous year in a dry dock accident. His name had never been transferred to the current list. The shipping company buried the incident and blamed it on an administrative error. The real crew was discreetly withdrawn and dispersed among various ships and ports. But one of them, a mechanic named Daimi, kept writing. In his last letter, sent from a remote town in Hokkaido, he claimed that he still saw the ships sometimes, not at sea, nor in dreams, but in crystals, in puddles, in dark windows on moonless nights. It was not just a ship that looked like the Kaisho Maru. His face appeared a second behind. His eyes did not blink. He wrote, "Now it follows me. I left it behind, but it never let me go. It remembers me, and I think that one day, when I fall asleep, it will rise again." Since then, the Mirror Sea has been sighted dozens of times by yachts, satellites, and even a U.S. reconnaissance plane that lost visual contact with land for exactly 6 minutes over the region. All reports agree. The sky folds over the water, compass needles spin, and the reflections deepen beyond visibility. And always, if you wait long enough, the ship below starts to change. Some believe that the mirror sea is a weak point, an interstice between dimensions where time, identity, and place are unleashed. Others believe it is a trap, a decoy, a surface so calm that it does not hide a reflection, but an invitation, a door that asks in silence, "What if you crossed?" What if the sea you sail is not the only one? Because maybe there is another version of each trip, another path, another ship, and maybe it is waiting for the moment when you are careless, just a little. It will no longer need to reflect you. It will simply replace you. Part 20. The Forgotten Ocean. Inside the earth under our feet lies a world deeper than any trench, darker than any abyss, and quieter than the most remote cave. For centuries, humanity believed that the ocean was the lowest place on Earth, the final descent into silence. But in 2014, a seismic mapping team working under the joint supervision of the United States Geological Survey and the Japanese Agency for Marine and Earth Science and Technology discovered something buried so deep beneath the Earth's crust that it changed everything they knew about the ocean and about what the Earth actually is. While studying the patterns of deep earthquakes under the Mariana Trench, the team observed a cluster of earthquakes at an impossible depth, more than 700 kilometers below the surface, well below the expected water penetration zone in the mantle. Earthquakes at this level should not behave like this. The energy was dampened, as if the shock waves were absorbed and redirected. But even stranger was that a faint acoustic resonance, barely above the threshold of perception, propagated over the waves. A repetitive, constant, and slow echo, like a sonar, but that did not come from us. Something was sending it up. At first, they assumed it was interference, anomalies in the data, but multiple stations confirmed the signal, all originating from the same region located under the Earth's lower mantle, a point of origin deeper than any natural body of water. That was the hypothesis until they performed a density scan. What they found defied logic. Within the ringwoodite layer, a rare form of high-pressure rock believed to trap water molecules, there was an area of material that responded to seismic pressure like a liquid. It was not humid or wet. It was completely fluid, and it was huge, thousands of kilometers wide. It extended in a vast elliptical shape through the upper-lower mantle, as if the Earth itself had formed a secret sea in its bowels, a hidden ocean locked inside the planet. The media would later call it the underground ocean or the Earth's third ocean. But what they did not know, what only a handful of researchers saw in the unedited data, was that the liquid was not behaving like trapped water. It was not stagnant. It was not passive. It moved smoothly, slowly, but with patterns, circular pressure changes, as if responding to tides, rhythmic expansions like a breath. And in those pressure changes, there was something that no natural phenomenon had ever shown. Modulation, a frequency change like a voice. The deepest part of the Earth was singing. The signal was kept secret. Only a few institutions had full access. One of them, a private contractor affiliated with Deep Earth Mining Technologies, built a model, a virtual simulation based on the structure of the signal. When it was executed, the program generated a three-dimensional topography of the resonance field. It resembled a labyrinth, spiraling, crisscrossing, fractal in shape, but not random. The pattern was repeated, a design, almost architectural. Then the simulation began to evolve. Without any intervention, the structure was remodeled. It extended columns, chambers, corridors. In the center, it formed a hollow dome, a perfect sphere suspended in space. The software began to render internal features, not geology or mineral deposits, but symbols, grooves along the walls, geometric spirals that pulse to the rhythm of the original frequency. The simulation was interrupted after 12 minutes. The system hung up. The code refused to restart. After that, everything changed then. One of the geodesists, a woman named Dr. Leona Kessler, began dreaming of water, not oceans. Water pressed inward from all directions. She described a weightless sea which did not reflect light, where the sky was of stone and the surface shone like skin. She drew maps as she slept, curved lines, tunnels, spirals. She spoke of cities without roofs, of doors that did not need to be opened. Her colleagues believed she was suffering a nervous breakdown. She believed the Earth remembered its past through her. Her last note, scribbled in the margin of a research journal, said, "The ocean is not on the surface of the world. It is inside the world." That is where it began. That is where we are going to return. She disappeared 3 weeks later. Her security card was last scanned at a geothermal plant near Iceland. Her body was never found. Later, another signal was captured, this time from Antarctica. Under the ice sheet, it was long suspected a lake known as Vostok hid life. Bacteria, microbes, perhaps something more. But in 2017, an anomaly in drilling sent a vibration to Earth with a precise frequency. The same frequency the Pacific data had shown. The resonance repeated from below, not from the lake, but beneath it. The same rhythm, the same modulation, and with it, a new pattern. This pulsed every 88 minutes. An orbital interval, a rotation. This suggested that what was in the Earth's hidden ocean was not only enormous. It was moving and had been doing so for a long time. What if the ocean we know, the one on the surface, was just a membrane, a reflection? What if it was born of something deeper, older? What if life had not begun in shallow seas, but in the pressure in the silence, in the echo of a sea that has never touched light? What if that sea remembers us? What if, when the tides align, it sends its voice upwards again, asking for its reflection to return? Some now believe that the Earth is not just a planet with an ocean. They believe it is an ocean, and that everything we are, our continents, our sky, our thoughts, are nothing more than the foam that floats on something that has never stopped moving under Earth's crust. Something that sings in darkness and waits to be heard again. Part 21. The island that disappeared from maps in the middle of the South Atlantic, between Santa Helena and Brazil's coast, is a stretch of open ocean that seems calm at first glance. Only water, wind, and waves that stretch endlessly in all directions. But in past centuries, this region was marked on nautical charts with a single point, often accompanied by vague warnings in Latin or Portuguese. Terra obscuro, hidden land, an island no larger than a few square kilometers without visible vegetation or consistent coast. It appeared and disappeared on hundreds of maps over the centuries, changing slightly in position each time, never with the same latitude twice. Its name changed over the years. Sometimes it was called Alto Brazil, sometimes Ilra, sometimes simply Insula Incognita. The sailors feared it. Some claimed it was made of black stone. Others said it was hollow. The common denominator was always the same. Those who saw it never approached it again. Those who tried to disembark often did not return. And those who claimed to have escaped spoke of impossible geometries, of cliffs that folded in on themselves, of waves that broke upwards, and of a sky that turned red at noon. Most modern historians discarded the island as a myth, a cartographer's error repeated when copying, an illusion born of cloud shadows or optical tricks. But in 1989, a Soviet satellite that swept the Atlantic as part of a classified naval reconnaissance program detected an anomaly, a reflection on the radar, too large to be a whale, too slow to be a ship, that floated only 10 meters below the surface and moved against the current. The satellite marked it for another scan. When it passed again 104 minutes later, the object had disappeared, except that now it had left something behind. A thermal footprint in the water, roughly oval, a mile long, perfectly smooth at the edges as if something had emerged from the depths, had remained still for a while, and then descended again. 2 years later, in 1991, a training exercise of the British Royal Navy encountered a thick fog in almost the same coordinates. Visibility was reduced to 0. All instruments failed simultaneously. GPS, compass, even emergency beacons. They tried to turn around, but one of the ships, the HMS Franklin, failed to return to the formation. It was missing for 23 hours. When it finally reappeared on the radar, it was 20 nautical miles from its last known position. The engines were off, and the crew was unresponsive to calls. When a boarding team finally reached it, they found the entire crew unconscious, but alive. There were no injuries or traumas. They were just sleeping, and they were all having the same dream. That is what the medical records later revealed. When they woke up, all the men and women of the Franklin remembered a series of identical images. An irregular coast, black cliffs rising from a pale ocean, and a single stone tower in the center of an island. The tower had no windows or doors, but they all described an identical feature, a spiral carved on its exterior that coiled to the top. They all remembered having approached it. They all remembered having heard something inside it, something like voices, but that did not speak to them, but spoke through them. No member of the crew fully recovered. Several retired prematurely. Others refused to sleep more than a few hours at a time, for fear that sleep would return. One of them took a vow of silence. Another drowned 2 months later, leaving only a drawing in his cabin. The same tower, the same spiral, and a single word scribbled over and over on the page. Once again, the event was classified as a collective hallucination caused by environmental stress. But the coordinates were noted, marked, avoided, but the sea never forgets. In 2003, a French oceanographic drone mapping the topography of the seabed in the South Atlantic captured a sonar image that surprised researchers. It showed a plateau, flat, even circular, almost 200 m below the surface. It was not an underwater volcano, nor a known mountain range, just a stone disk, perfectly symmetrical, 2 kilometers wide, protruding from the seabed like a coin placed on cloth. In its center, there was a needle, thin, that rose straight up from the rock. The sonar image was corrupted after only 1 frame. The drone system shut down seconds later. It never restarted. Some now believe that the island has not disappeared, that it never disappeared, that it never disappeared, that it is awake only when the sea allows it, that it is not moved by tectonics or tides, but by choice. Because it does not belong to the ocean. It belongs to something that is below. A recurring theory among deep-sea theorists is that the island is not land at all, but an interface, something between a place and a signal, a form that calls itself into existence. A structure that mimics the Earth long enough to be seen, remembered, dreamed again. They believe that it resurfaces not according to a calendar, but according to cue. When certain minds pass nearby, when the sea is calm, when the sky is reflected perfectly, then for a moment the island returns. Not in geography, but in thought, in nightmares and whispers. And every time it returns, it is closer because the tower never moves. But we do. And one day, someone will get to it again, someone will follow the spiral, and finally, what is inside will be heard. Part 22. The sea that exists. Only once does a legend exist that is whispered among deep-sea sailors, divers, long-haul freighter crews, and satellite oceanographers. It is not a place, nor a current, nor a moment, nor a phenomenon. They call it the ocean that was. It is not marked on any map, but it does not need to be, because it is not found anywhere. It happens to you once, only once. They say that at a certain moment in your life at sea, in silence, often when you are completely alone, the ocean around you changes. The sky does not darken. The stars do not blink, but something in the texture of the water alters. The way it moves, the sound it makes, the weight it exerts under the ship. You feel it in your bones, in the nape of your neck. Your breathing stops without you realizing it. You look around, and the ocean looks the same, but you know it is not because at that moment you have entered the unique ocean. Those who have experienced it do not forget it, because it never happens again. The testimonies are disturbingly coincident. Regardless of age, nationality, year, or ship, the water becomes one shade darker. The horizon recedes. The sky seems closer, more present, as if it were watching. And then, without warning, the sea begins to show you things, not hallucinations or dreams. Memories. The first known report dates back to 1870 and comes from a merchant sailor named Elias Grimm. His diary, preserved in salt-stained leather, narrates a sudden silence on deck as they crossed the Indian Ocean. His entire crew had gone down to the deck. The wind stopped. The sails hung like flags at half-mast, and the water became like a mirror. Below the surface, he claimed to have seen a city, not Atlantis, or ruins, but a living city with towers, lights, and movement. He saw figures walking below, as if the water were their natural sky. And in the center of the city, he saw himself, older, immobile, standing in front of the sea from a platform. The reflection held his gaze until the ship swayed again. The wind returned, and the ocean turned blue again. Grimm never returned to sea. In 1955, a Norwegian research submarine testing pressure holes recorded an abrupt change in external pressure, even though there were no depth changes. The crew reported a feeling of timelessness. One of them, a sonar technician named Onkidal, claimed that she heard music through the hull, not random, structured, layered, something like a lullaby played with water bells. It lasted 3 minutes and then ended. Later, Dahl said that the melody only returned to her once, during childbirth. The same exact tones, as if the sea had whispered something to her, a sound that she would only understand at the moment when life began again. In 1998, a lone sailor crossing the Atlantic encountered a dense fog. When it cleared, he found himself surrounded by identical versions of his own sailboat, reflected in all directions, not like a mirror, but duplicated. Each boat was placed at a slight angle, slightly misaligned. Each one seemed to move independently, with the sails catching a wind that he could not feel. And on each deck, he saw a figure standing silently, watching. He turned in a complete circle and saw the scene repeated infinitely, but the ocean never moved. He simply kept it there, like a moment frozen between heartbeats. He fainted. When he woke, there was only water. These are the fragments that people share. But the deepest theory is stranger still. Some researchers studying acoustic anomalies believe the ocean not only transports sound, but stores it. That water can contain memories in the same way that a hard drive stores data. That each wave, current, ripple is coated with traces of what passed through it. And that in very exceptional cases and perfect conditions, the ocean reproduces it, not as a recording, but as an invitation. It is believed the ocean is a temporal fold in the sea's memory, a moment in which the ocean remembers you, not as you are now, but as you were or will be. It shows you what matters most, not to scare or confuse, but to remember, realign. Because the sea does not follow time as we do. It carries the past, present, and future in its depths all at once. And sometimes, for a person a split second, it pulls that thread and lets them see. Some say the ocean of yesteryear is a test. Others say it's a gift, but all agree on one rule. It only happens once. No matter how many times you cross the sea afterwards, no matter how long you sail, no matter how much silence envelopes you, the ocean will never do it again. You can't beg for it. You can't invoke it. You won't even know you've entered until it's begun. And when it ends, you're left with an overwhelming feeling. It's not terror, not entirely, but absence. As if a door opened in your life and then closed forever, leaving only the memory of light. A final note from a sailor who crossed the North Pacific in 2007 says, "I simply don't know what I saw, but it was me, and it was real. The ocean let me see it just once. I think it's all I'm going to have." Part 23. The Sound That Should Not Be Heard. Early January 2012. A seismic station located in the depths of the southern Indian Ocean recorded a low-frequency signal unlike any previously cataloged. It was not part of tectonic activity. It was not the song of a whale or volcanic tremor. It pulsed once every 11 seconds and then stopped. Always the same pause, same tone, constant as a heartbeat. The listening system was designed to detect nuclear submarine activity or underwater eruptions. But this signal did not fall within the usual spectra. It was not mechanical. It was not geological. It had structure. For weeks, the signal repeated every 11 seconds of silence. Then it reappeared, seeming to come from a region near the southwest mountain range of India, thousands of meters below the surface. There were no cables, outposts, or settlements, just a cold abyss and slow drifting currents. Attempts to triangulate the origin only led to more confusion. The signal was inconsistent in its direction. It seemed to bend around the instruments. Some believed it was bouncing off submerged cliffs. Others were not so sure it was bouncing. An acoustic analyst observed something strange in the waveform, slight fluctuations in amplitude that, when joined, formed repetitive arcs. When processed with pattern recognition software, the arcs matched the frequency modulation of spoken human language, but not any known language currently. A linguistic researcher compared the sequence with ancient writings, dead alphabets, even nonverbal tonal systems, such as the whistled languages of Lamara and the Hortler Highlands in Mexico. He found no match at all, except there was a partial match. A phrase was engraved on the stone pillars of a sunken structure off the coast of Nan Madol in Micronesia. The symbols, partially eroded by centuries of salt and tides, presented a series of similarly spaced grooves, not identical, but similar enough for the software to point them out. The engravings were believed to be decorative. Now, they were being reconsidered as phonetic ones. This discovery never was published. Soon after, the signal stopped, but left something more than just a mystery. 3 days after the last pulse, a Norwegian cargo ship called Voltbrand passed directly over the coordinates while heading for Perth. Halfway through its journey, all the ship's depth monitors stopped working at the same time. The ocean beneath them stopped being measurable. It was not that the sea had gotten deeper. It was as if the instruments could not locate the bottom. Then the noise came. The bridge audio log captured a deep oscillation that rose to a trembling tone and then fell silent. The crew hurt more with their bones than their ears. Those below deck reported nausea, vertigo, and something even more disturbing. They said it seemed as if the water under the ship was pulling upwards, as if gravity had reversed for a moment. Nothing rose, no bubbles, no light, but the feeling that something huge was moving directly beneath them felt undeniable. When the ship docked, it was quarantined without any explanation. The interviews remained classified. Hull scans revealed an unexpected pattern along the vessel's bottom. Subtle indentations spiraling outward from the keel. They were not scratches or damage, but pressure marks of the type left by suction cups. But no marine creature large enough to cause such marks had ever been seen or recorded in that region. Some theorists suggest that the signal was not intended for us, but a beacon or a call, some kind of underwater architecture that was reactivating after millennia of lethargy. Others believe that it was never a transmission, but a containment field that was weakening. The idea is simple and terrifying, a sound that is not sent, but rather filtered. A former Navy sonar operator, who analyzed the raw data unofficially, stated something chilling in a personal memo. This signal is not being transmitted out. It is escaping now, and the pattern is not a call at all. It is a chant, a loop designed to reinforce something. A wall or a seal. Perhaps it was keeping something in its place. When the signal ceased, small anomalies began to appear around the world. Small pressure spikes occurred in the Caribbean. Unexplained magnetometer readings in the Philippine Trench area. A momentary heating pulse was detected under the Weddell Sea. Individually meaningless, but together they formed a ring like a chain breaking link by link. In late 2014, a different pattern emerged then. It was not a sound, nor a tremor, but just a silence. Sensors that had always recorded background noise in the depths began to return null values. Places that previously had a constant resonance, sediment flows, and deep currents fell silent, as if someone had silenced parts of the ocean. The signal has never returned since. But divers in certain places now report strange sensations in the depths, as if they were being watched from below, as if the sea was no longer asleep. A diver in the Karatek Trench described hearing something behind him while suspended at 10,000 m. It was not noise, nor a voice. It was a thought that was not his own. His diving vlog ended on a final note. The sound never stopped. We simply stopped hearing it. And now the ocean is silent, which is how you know it's listening. Part 24. The lighthouse that was not built on a rugged stretch of the southern coast of Chilean Patagonia, where the wind is a constant scream and the waves hit the rock with the force of ancestral memory. There is a cliff that overlooks nothing. There is no port, reef, or island visible in any direction. However, at the top of this cliff, half devoured by moss and time, stands the stone base of a lighthouse. or rather, what remains of it. There is no tower, no walls, no metal, only the base, huge and circular, made of black basalt, with engraved marks that fade into the rock as you look at them. The locals avoid it. The maps refuse to name it, and official records say that no structure was ever built there. But sailors swear they have seen its light. It always starts the same, a dense fog that spreads faster than normal, hiding the stars and the sound of the wind. Then, just above the edge of the cliff, a sudden, thin, cold and blue beam sweeps slowly over the sea in a perfect arc. There is no tower, no silhouette, only light. It never blinks. It never flickers. It does not illuminate the fog. They followed it in the hope of finding shelter. But as they approached, they found no coast or port. The light passed once over their ship, and all the energy was cut off instantly. The engines failed. The needles of the compasses spun uncontrollably. A sailor reportedly lost consciousness. The others described a sharp metallic taste in their mouths and the sound of a bell, not ringing, but vibrating as if they held it tightly and it struggled to sound. Then the fog dissipated. The light disappeared, and the cliff, bare and black, rose in silence. 3 days later, the Iskarin was found adrift by a Chilean patrol boat. The crew remembered nothing of what happened after the light. All their clocks had stopped at 2:14 a.m. The navigation log ended in the middle of a sentence. The entry simply read, "We have turned around, but the light is now behind us." Over the following decades, reports came in from other ships. Flashes of light at impossible distances, seen only once and never confirmed. Crew members who claimed to have heard voices just before the fog lifted, always saying the same phrase in Spanish, Norwegian, or whatever language they knew. "You shouldn't have come back." But it was what happened in 1968 that really shocked the scientific world. A geophysical research team from Santiago was commissioned to map magnetic anomalies along the southern Chilean coast. When their instruments passed near the cliff, still unnamed and unmarked, they recorded a total loss of signal. One of their analysts, intrigued by the disturbance, approached the base of the cliff and photographed the stone platform. When the photos were developed, something impossible appeared. The platform was not empty. In the photos, although it was not visible at the time of capture, a tower stood, pale, angular, built of an unknown material that was neither stone nor metal. Its surface rippled slightly, as if catching a breeze that did not exist. The tower leans slightly away from the sea, and where the lamp should be, there was only a narrow vertical slit of darkness that did not reflect light. The team dismissed it as a double exposure. They returned a week later, and the tower had disappeared. But when they developed the new film, it reappeared. From that moment on, access to the place was restricted discreetly. Satellite images were limited. Tourist guides stopped including the nearby trails, but the light continued to appear. In 1999, a private submarine cable laying operation passed less than 80 kilometers from the site. Its remotely operated submersible detected an unexpected structure under the water, a spiral column descending from the seabed towards the abyss. Following the same curvature and angle as the invisible tower above, it was made of the same dark material. Its surface emitted a frequency just outside human hearing range, which caused slight disorientation and vertigo in the operator, even through the thick glass. They called it an underwater beacon. It pulsed once every 17 seconds. Then, without warning, it stopped. In the next hour, the light was seen again, this time from below. The cameras on board the ROV captured a beam that crossed several hundred meters of water and came from the structure. When it passed, all the images were corrupted. Later, the machine was recovered with half its systems inexplicably erased and a fine black residue attached to its casing, which smelled faintly of salt and something like ozone. Some now believe that the light does not guide ships. It filters them, but the tower, if that's really what it is, was never built by human hands. That the foundations on top of the cliff are not ruins, but an anchor, a marker, a re-entry point, and that the light is not meant to be followed. It is intended to determine something, to measure. There's a theory that says that the sea does not allow everything to pass freely, that it remembers which boats belong to it and which do not, that the light exists to remind the ocean who has crossed it before and who is crossing it again when they shouldn't. Those who see it more than once are never seen again. In 2021, a fishing boat from Slovenia captured a short video of the cliff during dense fog. At 2:14 in the morning, the light appeared. It swept the bow, and the instant it passed, all the screens on board lit up white. During one frame, an image was recorded on the ship's navigation monitor. A tower of impossible dimensions, which did not rise from the sea, but from beneath it, extending downwards forever. The crew recovered, confused but unharmed. However, when they arrived at Shaw, they found something waiting in their records, a folder labeled Reentry 0003. The ship had never had such a file system. The date was 1968. The ocean forgets many things, but the lighthouse does not, because it was never built. It stayed behind. Part 25. The ship that set sail for tomorrow in October 1974, the SS Advina Resolute, a medium-sized research vessel operating under a European academic consortium, departed from Cabo Verde on what was to be a 6-day hydrographic expedition across a calm stretch of the eastern Atlantic. The weather was stable, the mission routine. On board were 23 crew members, 7 scientists, and a journalist. On the third night, the ship disappeared from radar. There was no distress call, no emergency beacon, just silence. The search efforts lasted for weeks. Planes tracked thousands of nautical miles. Rescue ships combed all possible drift routes. Nothing was found. The ship's transponder stopped working exactly at 2:47 a.m. GMT in the middle of calm, storm-free waters in the satellite. All official efforts ceased after 2 months. The incident was buried under bureaucratic failure and budget reallocations. The families never received the bodies, only vague condolences and contradictory explanations. For years later, in December 1978, a cargo ship on the route between Rifai and Lisboa sighted a drifting vessel with dim but working lights. It was the Advana Resolute, completely intact. The crew that boarded it found the ship with power, the diesel engines with little fuel, but still hot. The navigation systems were working. The pantry was stocked. The cabin seemed recently used. There was half-finished food on some tables and steaming coffee in cups. On the bridge, a radio was softly playing, repeating a weather report from 1974, but no one was on board. Not a single person, no signs of struggle, no water damage, no deployed life rafts. All personal belongings were in place. Clothes, newspapers, watches. In the lounge, a chess game was frozen in the middle of a game. The captain's log was up to date until the moment they disappeared. The last entry said, "Land is still not seen. The instruments indicate that we are moving, but nothing changes. The C2, the stars still seem strange." And then, nothing. An immediate forensic investigation was done. All electronic devices, although working, had the wrong date, exactly 4 years ahead. The chronometers had deviated, but the internal clocks of the ship's central computer had been adjusted forward to December 1978 without any intervention. Analysts dismissed it as a malfunction, but naval team engineers confirmed that such deviation was impossible without reprogramming or the passage of time. The hull showed no deterioration. The fuel degradation levels were consistent with only days of use. The thermal patterns inside the ship suggested that there had been a human presence in the last 48 hours. The food was not moldy. The ice in the freezers had not melted, but the people had disappeared. After weeks of investigation, the ship was towed to a restricted military dock in España and sealed off. None of the investigation results were public. The remains of the crew were never recovered, but a test leaked. An audio fragment was found buried in the ship's black box. It was not a distress call, but a muffled and shaky conversation. The last voice on the tape spoke clearly in a muted, frightened tone. "Don't look at the water. It is no longer our reflection." The investigators became obsessed with the case for years. Theories flourished. A strange electromagnetic phenomenon. a giant wave that pushed the ship into a temporal fold. Some suggested that the crew had suffered some kind of collective amnesia and had disembarked during a hallucinatory episode, but that did not explain the frozen moments. The coffee was still hot, the radio tuned to a station that had stopped broadcasting in 1975. Then, in 1992, a satellite mapping system owned by a Norwegian maritime data company detected an anomaly in the South Pacific. A ship identical in shape and dimensions to the Adena Resolute appeared for 37 seconds on high-altitude radar before disappearing again. No transponder, no AIS beacon, just a spectral silhouette gliding across the sea faster than any known vessel could. The route it followed did not match the currents. It seemed to be drifting against the wind. In 2001, a long-range buoy captured a VHF signal from an unregistered source. A call sign was transmitted twice. Advina Resolute leaving. That frequency had not been used in decades, and the coordinates transmitted were blank ocean. A listening station played the message through audio visualization software. The waveform, once superimposed, formed a spiral, and, in its internal spirals hidden in the noise, was a pattern that matched the previous recording of the black box. Some believe that the Adena Resolute never disappeared entirely. They believe that it went beyond the limits of time, into an extension of sea that does not flow forward or backward, but spirals outward. A loop trapped between years, that is only glimpsed when the tide of chronology moves too far away, suggesting the crew did not drown or flee. They went into something that does not measure time as we do. It is rumored that other ships have followed them there, that sometimes, late at night, when the stars do not match your map and the waves reflect nothing, it can be seen on the horizon. A pale ship with warm lights and an empty deck that slips just out of your reach. And if you call to it, you will hear your own voice echoing. Slower, a few seconds. Too late. It's not a recording, it's a response now. Because the ship is still out there, sailing towards tomorrow, waiting for the sea to forget what day it is, waiting for you to join it. And if you ever hear the call, guess a decided exit, do not answer because answering is how they find you. Part 26. The Depth That Did Not Exist Yesterday. In March 2006, a joint international expedition was launched to carry out a high-resolution mapping of the seabed near the Tonga Trench, one of the deepest and least explored regions of the Pacific. The project was led by a collaboration between the National Institute of Water and Atmosphere Research of Nueva Zelanda and a private European geospatial data company, using a newly updated multi-beam sonar system, capable of detecting variations in sediments with an accuracy of 1 meter. Its objective was to refine the tectonic models for the region. Instead, what they found was a hole. On the second day of exploration, a section of the trench bottom showed an anomaly in the signal. A sudden vertical drop of almost 12 kilometers deep, which sharply cut the surrounding seabed with a precision that did not correspond to any known geological process. The shape was smooth, symmetrical, almost architectural, like a well drilled straight down into the Earth's crust. At first, it was thought to be an error in the data, but several passes confirmed the same result. A perfectly round void, 37 m wide, descending beyond the reach of the systems. No sides, no floor, just darkness. The onboard system automatically labeled the anomaly, but the depth exceeded the introduced model. That should not happen. The scientists checked the bathymetric records. Such a formation had never before been documented. The satellite radar from just 3 months earlier showed normal terrain. There was nothing there before. It was not an ancient formation rediscovered. It was new, or rather, it was not there yesterday. When they lowered a probe into the void, it began to transmit normally up to 5,400 m when the pressure readings froze abruptly, remaining completely flat. As the descent continued, the cable showed no resistance, no impact, no changes, just a smooth fall. At 8,200 m, the onboard camera began to capture flickering distortions. They were not particles or plankton, but luminous anomalies like reflections, but there was nothing to reflect. Then the probe stopped descending, not abruptly or with a jolt. The descent simply slowed and then reversed. The cable began to coil on its own, as if something below was pushing it up. The winch tightened as if it were under pressure. When the probe finally surfaced, it was intact but altered. The housing was no longer uniformly metallic. Small crystalline structures, almost like frost, coated the outer casing, except that the water temperature had remained constant. When analyzed, the residue was found to be a compound that was not listed in any known database. Its atomic network was symmetrical down to the picometer, something virtually impossible outside of artificial materials. Two of the scientists who participated in the recovery later reported auditory alterations. One described hearing low voices through the metallic floor of the ship. Another began to suffer from migraines that coincided exactly with the tidal changes in the trench area. The third, a systems engineer, claimed that the onboard computer was responding to commands that he had never entered, opening files and showing simulations of spiral tunnels with branching corridors that did not correspond to any known sonar data. 2 days later, the crew prepared for a second dive. But before the equipment could be deployed, the hole had disappeared. It did not collapse, nor fill. It simply disappeared. A new skin showed a smooth seabed, without depressions or alterations. The layers of sediments that should have moved were intact, as if nothing had existed. The GPS coordinates were the same. The ocean was calm, but all systems scanning the area gave a strange reference reading, a constant frequency resonance just below the human hearing threshold, too precise to be natural, like a signal or warning. The area was marked on the ship's map as no data. Attempts to remap the site caused the instrument's failure. On 2 occasions, the sonar system tried to redirect to different coordinates, more than 3,000 kilometers away under the Philippine Sea. The scientists interrupted the mission and returned to port. Back on land, 2 researchers abandoned the project without explanation. One of them, a veteran marine geologist, disappeared during a solo dive near the Arca Caratica. His last logbook entry contained a series of numbers, coordinates that did not point to any place on Earth, but to an impossible vector, a point located thousands of kilometers beneath the seabed. He had written simply, "It's not a hole, it's a hinge." Since then, reports of similar anomalies in deep-sea data have emerged. Sudden, inexplicable vertical voids that appear and disappear without warning, without tectonic precursors, without geological context, always symmetrical, always silent, always deeper than they should be. Some believe that these voids are gaps, moments when the seabed opens, not by pressure, but by intention. That these places are not accidents or phenomena, but mechanisms, interfaces, doors. And every time one appears, we are destined to notice it, but only once. Because they don't open for us. They open despite us. And whatever is below, whatever weight waits in the silent pressure beyond measurable depth, does not rise quickly. It moves. Learn. Remember. What if the sea is not hiding something in the depths? What if depth is the key? What if the ocean is not full of water, but of layers? Layers that we were never meant to cross. Layers that sometimes open enough to breathe. And when they do, we call it an anomaly, but for something else, it could simply be breathing again. Part 27. The Whispers Between Waves. In the late summer of 1985, an experimental listening station was quietly installed at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ridge, about 700 kilometers west of the Azores. It was only known by its code name, Project Quietfall, developed through secret collaboration between NATO intelligence and a private acoustic research division. Its official purpose was to monitor seismic activity and underwater tectonic shifts. But the real goal was simpler and stranger, to listen not only to movement but to intention. For decades, naval researchers had rumored that the ocean produced sounds that did not correspond to any environmental explanation, nor to random frequencies, patterns, intervals, or repetitions. Project Quietfall aimed to catalog these anomalies and isolate their source. The assembly consisted of 32 hydrophones arranged in a geodesic spiral along a 4 kilometers network, calibrated to capture low-frequency signals over long distances. For the first 5 months, the signal yielded nothing more than the expected data: distant whale songs, underwater roars, the endless hum of the current against rocks. But then, on day 163, at 3:16 a.m. UTC, all hydrophones activated simultaneously. The signal came from below the network, not from one side or the other side of the seabed, but from beneath it. The transmission lasted exactly 7 minutes. It began with a low, hesitant tone, changing pitch like the breath of some buried instrument. Then behind it, another layer emerged. It was not music nor noise, but voices, dozens, perhaps hundreds, speaking in unison, in no known language, but structured, deliberate, like a chant made impossible by the water's density. When the analysts reproduced the audio at 10 times the speed, the sound became disturbingly familiar. The rhythm mirrored human breathing. Inhalation, exhalation, pause, over and over. Slow, almost imperceptible, it sounded like wind moving through a metal forest. But when the wave shape was visualized, it revealed something even more strange. A pattern of glyphs began forming, fluid, symmetrical, turning inward like a spiral collapsing on itself. The engineers entered the image into AI recognition software, hoping to find gibberish. Instead, the system returned one word: threshold. The following night, the signal came back. This time, only 3 hydrophones activated, then 5, then 7. It was as if sound moved through the matrix. Testing it, learning its limits. The researchers tried sending a pulse in response. The system short-circuited instantly. An overload struck the surface relay and killed the backup power. When the power returned 40 minutes later, the system erased itself. The storage unit was intact, but completely empty. It had not been erased or overwritten. All files were replaced by static, except one, a single image file, corrupt but partially recoverable. The image showed the grid pattern of the network itself, but it was biased and deformed into a curved shape, as if bent around something invisible in the center, a pressure so dense that it distorted space itself. During the following weeks, Quietfall began detecting new anomalies. Pressure zones that did not correspond to any tectonic activity, static bubbles in the water that blocked the sonar, and intervals of total silence where the ambient noise of the sea should have been deafening. A diver who helped check the sensors on a follow-up mission reported that he had heard whispers through his suit. A dozen overlapping voices, repeating a phrase that made no sense. The surface is a membrane, stay below. The diver did not return to sea after that mission. His personal diary, later published anonymously online, described dreams of inverted coasts and waves moving upwards. In one entry, he wrote, "We are the ones who are creating waves in something that was still. It woke when we heard it." In late autumn, Proyecto Quietfall was dismantled. Officially, the funds ran out, but internal documents suggest that the decision was made after a last recording, never revealed to the public, but rumored among those who worked on the device. It was a voice, unique, clear, speaking in English. It said, "Do not send sound where silence is imposed." And then nothing, no signals, no whispers. But something changed in the ocean around. Commercial vessels began to report anomalies in their compasses. The currents subtly changed. The deep water's temperatures altered enough to trigger a cascade of biological migrations. Certain species of deep-sea fish disappeared from sonars for months. The whales deviated hundreds of kilometers, and the underwater microphones not related to Quietfall spread throughout the Atlantic for various research projects began detecting an absence. Not only silence, but silence in places that should be full of noise, as if something dug a hole in the sea and absorbed all vibrations. The tacit theory among the last surviving members of the Quietfall team is this: the ocean was never empty. It was sealed. The sounds we hear, the creaks, the moans, the distant screams are not just movements of water or life. They are resonances of something that is below that seal, something ancient that is not dead or asleep, but listening. And when we send sound, when we pulse, ping, scan, we are not just observers. We're calling. And someday, something might answer. But not with a sonar, nor with light, but with the voice and the weight of a forgotten pressure. Because in the most ancient parts of the ocean, where sunlight has never arrived, where no diver has reached the bottom, the silence is not empty. It is a border, and it was destined to remain intact. Part 28. The fisherman who brought something in the winter of 1993 in a coastal town of the Kamchatka Peninsula, hidden between cliffs and rivers fed by ice, began to whisper about a man named Yuri Ananov. He was a solitary fisherman, one of the last in town who still went out alone in a wooden boat without a motor, only with oars and a broken compass. For decades, Yuri was part of the landscape, quiet, reliable, never straying from the coast for more than one night. But at the beginning of February, just after a violent storm on the high seas had stirred the sea until turning it to slate, Yuri did not return. The villagers assumed that he had drowned, but he returned 4 days later. His boat was soaked and deformed. The oarlocks were shattered. He was missing his coat. He was barefoot and carrying something wrapped in canvas, tied with wire and sealed with tar. He said nothing, not when they took him out of the boat, nor when the doctor examined him, nor when his wife begged him for an explanation. He just stared at the sea with narrowed eyes, as if he was still not sure what he was seeing. That night, Yuri burned the object behind his house. The witnesses described thick black smoke and a smell that made the air feel strange. A metallic and sharp smell, like ozone and rotten seaweed mixed in the lungs. The fire whistled, it did not crackle. And when it was finished, nothing remained, not even ashes, only a circle of sand where snow had refused to settle. Yuri only spoke once after that. 3 days later, he sat in the middle of the town square, with bloodshot eyes and trembling fingers, and uttered a single sentence. There is a bottomless depth, and I saw what goes into it. Then he fell silent again. He died a week later while sleeping, with his mouth open and his hands clenched against the void. They buried him in a wooden coffin weighted with stones. But after the funeral, strange things began to happen. The seals stopped approaching the coast. The birds disappeared. The tides changed, and the waves broke against the docks with a slow swaying that did not match the moon. Some villagers began hearing things early in the morning, a serious and constant hum that vibrated through the walls of their houses. Others claimed to see lights beyond the ice floes that went into the depths. They were not reflections or boats. Something green and slow, like fireflies crawling in the abyss. And then a child disappeared. A child named Lev, 6 years old, last seen playing near the place where Yuri had burned the object wrapped in canvas. His footprints led to the shore and then stopped. There were no drag marks, no signs of struggle. He had simply disappeared. The snow that fell afterwards refused to cover the trail. For 3 days, his path remained visible, sharp and clean, as if preserved by the air itself. After that, the town changed. The houses were walled up. The nets were left to rot. Nobody fished. Nobody spoke of the ocean. In private, they called it Yuri's curse, but not out loud. People stopped looking out the windows at dusk, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Some said that late at night, when the wind died down and the sea calmed like a mirror, they could see something beneath the surface with wide, slow eyes, blinking, floating beneath their boats, watching without moving, always looking up. The last family left in the summer of 1995. But 20 years later, in 2015, a research vessel mapping sediment patterns in the region detected a strange reading near the coast of the old town, a perfectly circular depression in the seabed, almost 200 meters in diameter and twice as deep, filled with fine, black sediment. Nothing grew inside it. No corals, no bacteria, no shell fragments, just a well of uniform density and temperature. Incredibly cold, even at that depth. Divers were sent. They reached the edge and turned on their flashlights. And what they briefly saw before the silt began to swirl was a pattern etched into the rock, a spiral that went inward, turning more and more until it disappeared into the well. Carved with surgical precision, a groove that looked recent. One of the divers claimed to have seen something move in the center. It was not a creature, but an undulation that deflected the light, as if something was thinking. The images were corrupted. The immersion was aborted. The team reported nausea and headaches. One of the men was temporarily blinded. When they surfaced, their instruments kept beeping, returning sonar echoes at 5-second intervals. Always the same shape. Always the same word on the screen. Return. What did Yuri bring? A piece of something, a warning, a beacon, or maybe it wasn't something he brought. Maybe it followed him. Maybe what he saw didn't want to be seen. But once it had to come with him. Not out of revenge, but out of curiosity. Because whatever lives in that bottomless depth doesn't just want to come to the surface. It wants to understand us. And sometimes when the surface becomes too calm and the world too silent, it sends something. A signal, a whisper. A man in a boat with empty eyes rowing toward a coast that will never be the same again. Because once you see what rises from the bottom of the bottomless sea, you don't come back. Really, no. You just take it with you and wait for the next boat. Part 29. The Station Under the Ice. In 1958, during the height of Arctic surveillance efforts in the midst of the Cold War, a small classified research station was built under the ice shelf of the Fram Strait, a narrow and volatile stretch of sea wedge between Greenland and Svalbard. Its code name was Echo Deep. Officially, it was a listening post, a set of acoustic devices designed to detect Soviet submarine activity through the use of strings of primitive hydrophones embedded in the ice and seabed. But internal records declassified decades later, after intense censorship, suggested a much stranger purpose. They weren't just listening to submarines. They were listening to repetitions. The problem started years before. Several reconnaissance missions reported strange underwater echoes. The transmissions were being reproduced from the depths. But no known geological structure could explain the delay or direction. So Echo Deep was built. It wasn't just a station. It was a vault lined with lead, isolated from vibrations, equipped with seismic sensors, resonance chambers, and early attempts at underwater spectral recording. There were no windows, no exit beyond a sealed hatch on the surface, and only 13 people who rotated every month. No one stayed longer than 30 days. In its first week, Echo Deep detected a pulse. Once every 19 hours, without fail, it lasted 7 minutes and came directly from beneath the platform. At 3,200 m deep, in an area without pits, thermal vents, or geological anomalies. It didn't sound like anything natural. A long, low harmonic chord pulsed at 5-second intervals. It wasn't a whale. It was not tectonic. It was organized. On the 16th, the pulse changed. Instead of a tone, it became a pattern. 5 dry knocks followed by an elongated hum, then silence, and then again. The sequence matched a pattern known as the Shannon-Fano coding scheme, used in early binary communications. Someone or something was transmitting structured data. But to whom? The team sent a response. A matching knock code, followed by a frequency sweep. No response was received, but the next pulse differed. The hum at the end was now distorted, as if recorded and played back incorrectly, as if the source was trying to mimic the original message, but couldn't quite replicate it. It wasn't responding, it was learning. The principal investigator, Dr. Owens Merrick, noted something even stranger in her records. Each time the pulse returned, the frequency was slightly higher by such a small amount that it would have been dismissed as sensor deviation, were it not for the equipment's precision. It was increasing as if ascending toward the ice platform. They sent a drone equipped with lights, sonar, and a connected communication cable. It descended under the ice. Following the signal to 3,140 m, the lights caught something. It was not a creature, nor terrain, but a perfectly flat surface with a metallic texture, covered by a film as if it had been there a long, long time. The drone approached. The surface moved. A ripple ran through it, not mechanically but organically as if breathing. Then the lights failed. The drone's video transmission went dark, but not the hydrophone. It captured something else. Voices, dozens overlapping. They weren't speaking. They were reading. The cadence matched human language, but not any known language. The pitch modulation matched vocal cords, but the era was incorrect. The sound was wet, like lungs that had never known air. The signal was recorded, archived, and never deciphered. On the 27th, the station was evacuated. 2 days later, the ice platform above the Echo Deep Vault collapsed. A section the size of Manhattan broke off and sank. The station was lost. No bodies were recovered. Only a single transmission was received in the last minutes. An emergency signal with a phrase embedded in the metadata. Remember the sound. In the years since, similar pulses have been detected in the waters of the Arctic and Antarctica. Always from the depths of oldest ice. Always in repeated intervals. Always increasing in frequency. As if something climbed, as if something old, something buried, used the form of our own voices to find a way up. Not asking for help, not calling us, just calling and listening for an answer. Because the ocean under ice is not silent. It is not empty. It is not asleep. It is recording. And one day, when the surface is calm enough, it will respond. Part 30. The ocean that rose without waves. In the early hours of August 3rd, 2004, exactly at 2:11 a.m., the crew of the Marisorphus, a transoceanic freighter that crossed a quiet stretch of the central Indian Ocean, reported a sudden, inexplicable change in sea. There are no storms, no tremors, no warnings of giant waves. The sky was clear and air calm. But something changed. According to the captain's navigation log, the water stopped moving. It tilted. A swell began to rise, unlike any recorded in modern maritime history. It did not come from a single direction, but from below. It was not a wave, nor a tidal wave, but an elevation. The surface of the sea bulged upward, forming a perfectly symmetrical dome almost half a kilometer in diameter. It was smooth and silent, as if the entire ocean inhaled. Radar instruments failed to track it. GPS systems failed. The dome did not reach its highest point or break. It simply remained suspended, rising steadily and distorting the stars in its reflection. The crew members described a low-frequency vibration that ran through their bodies like a heartbeat. Their radios went silent. It was not an absence of static, but the kind of silence only heard inside caves or behind closed vaults. At its peak, the dome reached almost 12 meters in height without a single wave breaking. Then, something began to emerge, not from above, but from within, a shape that rose slowly toward the center of the dome. It was first described as a shadow, then as a tall, slender structure formed by interlocking columns like vertebrae. At the top, a shape that resembled an eye, but not organic, perhaps a lens. The crew's descriptions varied. Some said that it was looking at them. Others said that its gaze passed through them, as if they were not there. One sailor collapsed. Another began to bleed from ears. The ship's lights dimmed, although all systems were still working. Then, the water began to descend again, without crashing, receding as if the sea had changed mind. The structure withdrew. The dome flattened. In 12 minutes, the ocean returned to normal, but the crew did not. All the clocks on the Marisorphus stopped at 2 hours, 11 minutes, and 49 seconds. The internal chronometers, the wristwatches, even the digital time code of the security images stopped. The second hand ticked once per minute, then went back 6 hours. They did what they did. Time did not pass inside the ship. The sun did not rise. The stars did not move. They were adrift, immobile. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, time resumed. The sun flickered in the sky, like a skipped film frame. The birds passed overhead, frozen in flight, then suddenly moved. All systems restarted at once, as if they had awakened. From a deep sleep, the crew asked for help by radio. There was no signal. They continued east. When they arrived at the port of Singapore 9 days later, they discovered they had arrived 3 days early. The trip had lasted less time than physically possible at their average speed. The port authorities confirmed it. They had arrived ahead of schedule. The incident was reported and then quietly erased. The ship was sold to a private entity. The crew dispersed, but one sailor retired years later and kept a diary. In it, he described what he remembered of those 6 frozen hours. how the stars had twisted over the dome, how their patterns had changed, how one constellation in particular, Orion, had disappeared, replaced by a cluster he had never seen, curved around an invisible center. He drew it. Years later, an astronomer collated the pattern, not with known star maps, but with gravitational lensing. The drawing matched a deep space observation of a cluster of black holes behind the Boötes void, except that observation had not been made until 2011, 7 years after the ships saw it in the sky, which left a question unanswered. How? Some theorists believe the dome was not made of water, but space. That the sea rose, not physically but dimensionally, a fold pulled up like a curtain, revealing something beyond our ocean. Not from below, but from beneath reality. That what the crew saw was not in our world, but grazing it, pressing enough to be noticed. Others believe that the dome was a lens, that water was used as a surface to enlarge or observe. That the lens was not intended for us to see the outside, but for something else to look inside. And when it saw us, it stopped, measured, then withdrew. But the most disturbing theory comes not from science, but myth. In some ancient seafaring cultures, there are stories of the calm sea, a place where the ocean forgets movement, a moment when the tide holds its breath. Myths say that when this happens, one should not speak, one should not move, one should not look too long, because the sea is not calm. It is listening, and it listens to those who do not know how to be silent. The Marissa looked, and something looked back, and since that night, every time a satellite passes over that stretch of ocean, a subtle distortion is observed in the waves, as if the sea remembered the shape it once had, as if it were waiting for the moment to rise again. Not with fury, not with floods, but with curiosity, because whatever lies beneath that stillness is patient and remembers who saw it. Part 31. The Diver Who Did Not Surface. In 1997, a documentary team from a European Oceanographic Institute set out to film the deep reef systems off the coast of Palau, one of the most biologically rich marine regions. The project had been in preparation for over a year. It was intended to be a calm and unhurried series that showed the underwater beauty, something that could be broadcast on national television. They were equipped with top-quality material, submersible cameras, and 2 divers licensed for extreme depths. The sea was calm, the weather stable, and the descent plan was routine. No part of the dive was to exceed 60 m. But on the second filming day, something changed. The diver's name was Marek Dvorsky. He was 41 years old, had military diving experience, was meticulous, and never took risks. He descended with a camera connected to a floating platform designed to record automatically without light corrections. At 57 meters, the camera's signal began to fail, not from pressure, but from interference. The image fractured, scattered into deformed lines, and then returned. But when it returned, something was different. The reef was not the same. It was not broken or dark. It had disappeared. Instead, there was only open water stretching in all directions behind the diver. The color balance of the images had turned pale. The greenish-blue tones had flattened into faded grays, and Marek, visible in the image, had stopped moving. He was not panicking. He was not in danger. He was simply looking ahead, with his mouth slightly open, breathing slowly, as if something had caught his attention just beyond the lens. When Mission Control called him on a radio, there was no response. Then a whisper was heard, not from him, but superimposed on the signal. A whisper that repeated in a loop. 3 words, broken and difficult, as if pronounced through gills. He has found me. No one on the team recognized the voice. The second diver was immediately sent, descending rapidly with a rope tied to Marek's. But when he reached the final depth, Marek was no longer there. His rope went into the darkness, loose and cold. The camera was still broadcasting live, showing the open water, but no reef, no diver, no movement was seen. The second diver, confused and increasingly restless, asked to be taken out immediately. When they pulled the rope, the camera disappeared. Only the harness remained, intact, unbroken, as if something had precisely unhooked the equipment. Marek's bottle was later recovered 400 meters from the point of descent, suspended in the water, floating in neutral buoyancy. But the suit, mask, and weights were never found. They combed the place for 5 days. Nothing. The images, when analyzed later, showed a final anomaly. Exactly 8 seconds before the camera transmission ended, the distortion cleared briefly, and something passed behind Merrick. It was not a creature, a shape, thin, long, without fins, without limbs, only movement, sliding in a way that bent the light around it like glass moving through water. In a single frame, the edge caught light. It was not scales nor skin, something smooth, something polished, a surface that did not reflect color, only depth. Merrick's last diving record was recovered from his equipment connection. It was mostly automatically filled sensor data. But in the manual notes section, something he always filled in before each dive, there was a single sentence no one remembered him writing. There's a place where light does not reach, but something else does. In the following months, the team dissolved. The images were never broadcast. The documentary was discarded, but rumors spread among diving communities. Some say that Merrick found a false thermocline, an invisible seam between 2 layers of the ocean, one that does not belong, a pocket, a fold, a door, that below there are corridors of pressure and silence, not mapped by sonar, not touched by the current, in which one does not fall, but drifts because they are not made of space, but of decisions that the ocean sometimes makes. A marine physicist who reviewed the records under a pseudonym suggested another theory. The sea is not only divided into layers of pressure and density, but also into layers of memory, since each depth keeps a record of what has passed through it. And sometimes, for unknown reasons, it reproduces one of those records. But what if Merrick was not a reproduction? What if they had received it? Every year, dozens of divers disappear in open water. Most are never found. Most disappearances are attributed to equipment failure or panic. But occasionally, one disappears in perfect conditions. Clear sky, stable current. There are no signs of struggle, only silence, as if they never existed. And sometimes, weeks or months later, a piece of equipment reappears, dragged by the sea, with strange scratches and a level of salt too old to belong to the sea of this season. A researcher found a mask with the name Merrick engraved on the inside of the rubber. They found it on a beach in Madagascar in 2012, almost a decade later and on the other side of the planet. When they analyzed it for biofilm residues, the mask tested positive for a microbial signature that did not match any known. The analyst's report concluded with a phrase written in red: unknown origin, possibly from a non-circulating body of water. The ocean is vast, deep, unexplored, but sometimes it opens to places that do not appear on maps, a place that remembers what it swallowed and patiently waits for what it will swallow next. Part 32. The File Under Coral. In 2009, during a study on coral bleaching in the South China Sea, a group of marine biologists working on a modified catamaran, known as Ardent Halo, came across what they initially believed was an undocumented reef structure. It was deep, resting at about 80 m, and not composed of organic coral, but of something entirely different. At first glance, it looked like petrified growth with strange crystalline ridges forming loops and spirals. But more detailed inspection revealed symmetry. The ridges were not random. They were perfectly spaced, repeating every 17 centimeters along a field more than 200 m wide. And between the ridges, fine carvings, geometries too complex to be natural. A latticework of engraved grooves filled with silt and time. At first, the team believed that it could be an old shipwreck buried under calcification, but sonar mapping revealed something that shattered that theory. The structure did not rest on the seabed. It was embedded within it. The upper surface was only the tip of something much larger. A shape at least 30 m high, with edges that continued under the seabed, like the visible part of an eye looking up from under Earth. They called it Site 9. When they lowered the lights, the material reacted weakly, not in color, but in temperature. The sensors recorded a 2 degrees Celsius drop around the structure, as if it were absorbing heat from the surrounding water. A diver, tasked with taking core samples from the grooves, surfaced in a panic. He claimed that he felt something gently pulling his body down, not by gravity, but by something more subtle, like a pressure that existed only in his mind. His words were, "I felt like it knew I was there." He refused to return. Another, more experienced diver went down 2 days later. This time, they brought a drone camera to accompany him. At the base of the visible structures, hidden under an overhang of sediments, the diver discovered a narrow crack no wider than a man's shoulder leading into darkness. Disobeying orders, he slipped inside. The camera followed. Inside the crack was no cave. It was a corridor not carved by erosion, but built. The walls were made of the same strange crystalline material, but polished smooth. And on those walls were engravings, not symbols or images. Something more disturbing. Rows and rows of perfectly engraved microscopic reliefs. Images of fish, yes, and cephalopods, whales and jellyfish. But not only modern species, but also extinct species and species that no one could identify. Creatures with translucent exoskeletons, vertebrates with spiral rib cages, cartilaginous shapes that looked like eels with limbs. Each image was labeled, not in any known language, but with consistent symbols carved identically next to each representation. The drone recorded everything until the transmission was abruptly interrupted. The last thing it showed was a large chamber that opened beyond the tunnel, full of hundreds more reliefs, and a last wall dominated not by animal life, but by a human figure carved in profile, standing looking down, surrounded by symbols. And then the signal cut off. The diver came to the surface in silence. He refused to speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he only said this: "It is not a record of the sea. It is a record of what the sea has taken." Attempts to return to Site 9 failed. In the following expedition, the structure had disappeared. It was not destroyed. It had simply disappeared. The coordinates were correct. The seabed was flat. There was no trace of carvings, crystalline residues, or sediment patterns. It was as if the entire dome had never existed. All that remained were the files, the video, the sonar, and temperature logs. The institution that financed the immersion archived them on an encrypted server and classified the case. But months later, a researcher, an archivist named Izuko Naka, began to notice something strange. The more she studied the images, the less stable they became. The images began to distort during playback. The symbols changed their orientation. New patterns appeared in the margins of the video frames. A sound began to overlap the signal, a low hum that was not present in the original recording. When it was slowed to a speed of 0.25x, the tone fractured into pulses of 24 per minute. She mapped the pulses and matched them to the archived set of symbols from the wall. They matched. The images were not degrading. It was evolving, trying to communicate, or even worse, try to rebuild something. Fearing what might happen next, the files were deleted. But 3 backup copies unknowingly stored on external hard drives for data redundancy were later recovered during unrelated projects. One was found plugged into a research station in Antarctica. The second was discovered in a sealed archive in Norway. The third was traced to an unregistered underwater operation in the Mariana Trench. None of them should have had access. None of them had requested the data. And yet, all 3 were playing the same clip on loop. The same final moments of Site 9. The hallway, the chamber, the human figure engraved in stone, and a soft, deep, aquatic voice, whispering a single word in a dozen overlapping languages. Do you remember what Site 9 was? A tomb, a library, a map, or was it something stranger, a memory of the sea itself, preserved not in flesh or salt, but in form? An autonomous archive buried for a reason, not meant to be found, not meant to be awakened. Something that records not only what the ocean has taken, but what it intends to take back. Because the ocean does not forget. It remembers every scream, every descent, every lost light, every breath held for too long. And under the coral, under the sand, under centuries of drifting silence, it has sculpted its own history, not to warn us, but to remind us. Part 33, The Monolith That Sang at Midnight. In 1981, the crew of a seismic calibration vessel called Hilla was commissioned to test new underwater frequency sensors along the Wanderfuca Ridge, a zone of tectonic expansion in the Northwest Pacific. Their mission was simple: deploy the anchors, test the propagation of low-frequency waves, and map subsea. The equipment was newly developed, capable of reading the signatures of sound vibrations at depths of up to 12,000 meters and isolating anomalies in the nanohertz range. The science was cutting edge. The sea and the project passed without incident until the fourth night. At midnight sharp, the ship's hydrophones activated with no warning. They began capturing a sustained tone coming from the ocean depths. It was not static or biological, but rich, deep, and unmistakably musical. It lasted 23 minutes. It did not modulate. It did not echo. It simply sang a single, perfectly tuned note suspended in the water column. The team assumed it was an error, perhaps an internal resonance of their vessel. But all the guys, separated by kilometers, received the same tone at the same frequency. No dilas, no dica. The signal was not coming from the ship. It was coming from below. When they triangulated the point of origin, it did not lead them to a chimney or a fault, but to a smooth plateau of basaltic crust almost 5,000 m below the surface. A place mapped dozens of times without distinctive features, unremarkable until it stopped being so. The sonar revealed something new, something vertical, a structure about 80 m high, alone on the seabed, cylindrical, smooth, perfectly symmetrical. It had not been there before. No previous mapping expedition had recorded it. Its composition did not match the surrounding crust. It was denser, colder, reflected sound like obsidian, but absorbed electromagnetic waves like porous stone. When the team reported it, the superiors dismissed the anomaly as a sonar ghost, a mirage created by the interference of deep currents. But the crew of the Heliora was not convinced. They sent an autonomous camera. It took 12 hours to descend. When it finally reached the seabed, the lights illuminated a huge black column, wider at the base and tapering as it ascended, with thousands of shallow horizontal grooves. All of them equidistant, like the notches of a tuning fork or the grooves on a vinyl record. But it was not a tool. It was something older, something waiting for something that nobody knew. And then, at exactly midnight, the tone returned. This time, the monolith pulsed once every 6 seconds. Its grooves emitted a faint phosphorescence, barely visible, like moonlight trapped in oil. Each pulse aligned perfectly with the tone. The two were synchronized. The crew recorded everything, but during playback a pattern emerged, an image buried in the waveform. When subjected to spectrogrammatic analysis, the sound formed an upward spiral structure with ramifications and a central axis. It was not a shape, a figure, a body, biomechanical vertebrate imposing. When inverted, it resembled the monolith itself. Some suggested that the signal was not a song. It was a projection, a diagram. The monolith did not emit the sound. It received it. The real transmission came from further down, bouncing off the column like a relay, as if the monolith were a receiver, or, even worse, an ear. On the fifth night, the signal changed. The tone broke. It did not break, it opened. The tone shifted upwards, and, in its core, the team heard something impossible. Layers a chord, then multiple a harmony. Each note overlapped the previous one, forming a structure not only of sound, but of intention. It was not random. It was composed, and within those tones there were voices. Not words, not human, but conscious. Sounds that had the rhythm of breathing, the cadence of speech, but filtered through water, depth, pressure, and something that had never touched the surface. Then, suddenly, silence. The monolith stopped shining. The tone faded. The sea returned to stillness. The following morning, the monolith had vanished. It was not damaged or knocked down. It had simply disappeared. The seabed was again flat, smooth, intact. But the autonomous camera, which continued recording during the disappearance, captured something before shutting off. A last frame, just one. A flash in the water, a distortion of the light, and then a movement not upwards but sideways, as if the structure had become out of phase, sliding along the seabed like water through a colander, without breaking the earth, abandoning it. The data was confiscated. The crew was interrogated and reassigned. But a sound engineer, now retired, leaked years later a part of the audio in an anonymous file called Midnight Under Stress Resonance Wave. It appeared briefly in a marginal marine forum, where an amateur spectrographic analysis revealed the same disturbing pattern. A spiral, a figure, an ascending tone, and in the silence that followed, a whisper. This is not your depth. What was the monolith? A receiver, a sentinel, an abandoned resonant instrument to measure something that is no longer remembered. Some believe that the oceans are not only full of creatures, but also of chords, tonal traces of ancient presences that once moved in the depths. The monolith was not an anomaly. It was part of the arrangement, a note in a larger symphony. And perhaps we are not meant to hear everything. Perhaps when we do, we will change. Because somewhere in the depths there is music older than breath, older than time, and it continues to sound under the pressure, under the darkness, under our knowledge, waiting for us to hum it. Part 34. The Black Window in the Thermocline. In the summer of 1994, a French expedition vessel named Solstice set sail from the Gulf of Guinea on a deep-sea exploration mission. The objective was simple: to measure the fluctuation of the thermocline in relation to climatic anomalies. The ship carried 4 oceanographers, a crew of 12, and a submersible drone capable of diving to more than 3,000 meters. The location was typical. The conditions were ideal, and for the first 6 days, everything went exactly as expected. Temperatures changed gradually as they descended. The layers of warm and cold water were stacked in stable gradients. But on the 7th day, just after midnight, the readings changed. A network of sensors located at 1920 m began recording an impossible thermal phenomenon. A strip of water only 4 m thick appeared completely black on the sonar and at room temperature. A constant temperature of 21 degrees Celsius in the middle of a deep ocean column, where it should have been near freezing. The anomaly was not hot. It was not cold. It was neutral, uniform, silent, and completely devoid of particles. They checked if the sensors were working correctly. They recalibrated them and deployed the spare ones. All the instruments said the same thing. A horizontal band of 4 m of perfect thermal neutrality, which extended indefinitely in all directions, calm as a line drawn in the sea. They lowered the submersible. It descended slowly, transmitting in real time. Everything below 1800 m seemed normal. Suspended particles, drifting life, the usual faint flashes of bioluminescence. But as the drone approached the anomaly, something began to happen. The video transmission darkened, not due to a loss of light. The contrast collapsed. The water outside the drone's lights turned an opaque gray, as if looking through an oil slick. Visibility was reduced to 0. There were no reflections or refractions, only a smooth and infinite black. Then, without any warning, the drone went through it. It emerged on the other side, and everything felt wrong. Below the band, the ocean was silent, not calm, but dead, without currents, drift, or living particles. The temperature remained stable at 21 degrees Celsius. The pressure had not changed. But no sound was heard, not even the hum of the drone's engines, which continued to respond to control but emitted no sound. It was as if the drone had entered a room, sealed, smooth, silent, incredibly stable. Then he saw the window. The camera captured a perfect rectangle, 2 meters high and just over a meter wide, standing upright on the seabed like a frameless door. It was not built into anything. It stood on its own. The material was unknown. It was neither stone nor metal. It did not reflect anything, but was clearly outlined against the gray water. It was flat but not still. Its surface shone not like glass, but like a fluid enclosed in shape. When the drone turned around it, the window's perspective did not change. It remained facing the camera at all times, as if refusing to be seen from any angle other than the front. And then, behind the window, a movement was perceived, not from outside, but inside the forms. They were not shadows or reflections, but neither were they from the drone. They were humans. Faces, torsos, open mouths, wide eyes, floating just below the surface like people submerged on the other side of a panel of water. They all watched, without swimming or fighting, just observing. There were at least 7, each at a different depth, as if suspended along a staircase made of liquid. One of them blinked slowly. Another tilted his head. They were all moving, but the water was still. There were no bubbles or traces, just shapes floating in absolute silence. The drone's lights flickered. The transmission was cut off. When they retrieved the drone, the hull was intact, but the external temperature sensors were all burned. Each one had been deformed from inside out. The data unit contained only fragments of the images. But the most disturbing thing was a frame captured exactly 1 second before the signal loss. A figure pressed against the black window, with a hand raised and crushed against the surface. He was not wearing diving equipment or clothing. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were closed. Written backwards, fogged on the inside of the glass, a word was below. The team ended the expedition ahead of schedule. The images were never broadcast. All reports submitted to the Institute were classified as instrument contamination. But months later, the ship's sonar technician, who had kept a personal copy of the signal records, noticed something else. Every day, at exactly the same time, 1:13 Universal Time, coordinated, the anomaly reappeared. A 4M black thermocline that moved silently through the ocean's thermographic maps like a ghost on radar. It was not stationary. It moved, sometimes disappearing for weeks, and then reappearing on the other side of the world. A window, not a structure or a machine, a passage, not from the surface to the depths, but from some depths to others, a space that does not obey the currents, time, or physics as we understand them. And behind, there were no monsters or myths, but us. Echoes of ourselves looking, reaching, watching, without asking for help, without trying to cross, just waiting. As if what is on the other side remembers the surface, remembers the breath, remembers the weight of gravity and light, and has no intention of returning. But from time to time, it shows us what it has become through the pain of a liquid night in a depth that should not be warm. In a moment when the ocean forgets movement, we call it anomaly. He calls this place home. Part 35, The Circle of Salt That Burned with Cold. In 1976, at the height of Soviet submarine expansion, a classified diving experiment was carried out off the coast of Murmansk, beyond the edge of the continental shelf. The mission's purpose, according to declassified naval files, was to test the resistance of an advanced submersible in extremely cold water. But internal memos suggest a different objective. The investigation of a stable, anomalous zone first reported by an underwater sonar operator 3 years prior, described only as a ring of persistent silence at a set depth. The zone was circular, 91 m in diameter, and acoustically dead. No sonar ping was received from within it. The mission was to discover why. A modified submersible called Glubin-7 was then deployed. The Glubin-7 was capable of withstanding pressure at great depth and prolonged exposure. It was equipped with multiple cameras, temperature sensors, and mechanical arms. 3 crew members were inside. As the ship descended, they reported nothing unusual until they crossed the circle. Instantly, all external sounds just disappeared. The murmur of the ocean, the mechanical echo, the noise of currents, all disappeared. It was as if silence swallowed them whole. Then the lights dimmed, but not because of a power outage. The ocean darkened, not like a shadow, but like ink dispersing in water. The crew described it as a light that thickened, a kind of visual pressure. And at the bottom of the sea floor, just below, they saw the salt. It was not scattered randomly. It was not naturally occurring. It was arranged, perfectly white grains arranged in layers on the black silt in a wide ring, no more than 3 fingers thick, forming a continuous line that pulsed faintly in the submarine's infrared filter. It radiated cold, so much so that the outer sensors began to give negative readings in degrees Celsius, incompatible with the surrounding pressure. The salt was burning, but in reverse, a thermal inversion. One of the crew described it as a flame that forgets what heat means. They deployed the arms to gather a sample. As soon as the clamp touched the salt, the lights went back to normal. The cameras flickered and then froze solid. The grain that touched the clamp just evaporated. There was no residue, no smoke. It simply disappeared. And from the center of the circle, a shape began emerging. It was not solid matter. At first, it wasn't even visible, just a distortion like heat waves spreading through water. But it rose slowly, without force or movement, and it was impossible to measure its height. At one point, the 3 men aboard reported that they felt it behind them at the same time, even though it remained in front of the submarine. Their words, according to the transcript, "It is seeing through me. It has no eyes, but it knows I have lungs. I feel like my thoughts are breathing." Then came the hum, inaudible, internal, as if the brain itself had tuned into a vibration deeper than thought. The 3 men started to tremble. One took off his gloves and pressed his hands against the glass dome of the submarine. Another began reciting prayers from his childhood, changing the language in the middle of a sentence. The third, Lieutenant Cornf, simply asked a question, "What do you know?" No one answered because no one understood what he meant. The transmission was then cut off. The next contact with the submarine occurred 27 minutes later, when it reappeared on the surface without power, floating in calm waters. The 3 men were unconscious. The interior temperature had dropped below zero. However, the hull felt warm to the touch. The sample claw had disappeared. The sensors of the external orifice did not register any pressure variation, any collision, or heat flow. The salt residues that had accumulated in the internal tray were now black, crystallized, and dry. But when touched, they whistled violently and cracked the container, while remaining at -30 degrees Celsius. 2 of the men finally woke. Lieutenant Korn never did. His body remained intact. He showed no trauma, but his brain showed patterns not associated with coma, stroke, or seizure. Instead, it was active, constantly firing in a rhythmic pulse matching the original acoustic silence. 91 hertz, repeating every 12 seconds. It was as if something had overwritten his dreams. The salt was later analyzed in a laboratory. Its composition matched that of sodium chloride, but it presented structural irregularities not found in any terrestrial sample. Each crystal was a perfect cube. All faces were engraved with microscopic striations that looked like neural folds. A subject exposed to a vaporized version experienced temporary aphasia, specular tactile synesthesia, and a vivid vision of being under the ocean. Not physically, but mentally. It was like drowning in language, he said. All my thoughts already belonged to something else. What was the circle? Some say it was a memory, a fossilized impression of something that once passed through there. Others believe it was a warning, a scar left by a being that did not arrive, but awakened. That the salt had not been placed there. It had grown like coral, like mold, like a signal residue that formed in a ring shape to contain what once stirred. One last detail never appeared in the official report. A few weeks after the rescue, the submarine Globina 7 was found adrift, unmanned, and with the cables cut. The rescue team located it 8 kilometers from the last dive site, adrift in the open sea. Inside was a small pile of dry salt. There was no trace of the crew, nor of an accident, nor of damage. And on the steel armor of the interior hatch there were some letters written with a finger or knife, in perfect uppercase alphabet. Do not surround what you do not bury. The barren anomaly was never visited again. But satellite images, collated over 20 years, showed that the ring returns every 7 years, briefly, perfectly at exactly midnight UTC on the first new moon after the summer solstice. It forms, waits, and then disappears again. No waves, no currents, just salt and silence. The ocean leaves no marks by accident. When it draws a circle, it is not for decoration, it is to contain. Music, 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 heat, heat, music, music, heat, heat, music, music, heat, heat, music.